Felix, I am 30 years old today. In order to pay for my mother's medical treatment, I embezzled 2.6 million US dollars of public funds without telling the company. My mother's illness was quickly treated, but I have been awakened from nightmares every night since then. However, I didn't expect that the truth would be exposed so quickly. Just when I was ready to face the jail time, the female president Wendy made a decision that I didn't expect. Felix, do you know what you did? CO Wendy's cold eyes swept over me, her voice as sharp as the wind in the cold winter. I nodded, my eyes dodging, my heart full of shame and uneasiness. Do you know what $2.6 million means? She looked at me sternly, with a tone of authority that could not be ignored. Believe it or not, I can put you in jail immediately. Of course, I can also give you a chance now, so that you don't have to go to jail. I can also pay for your mother's medical expenses. I was stunned and looked up at her, my eyes full of confusion and bewilderment. What do you mean? From today on, you will be my husband by agreement for 4 years. She turned around, her face very serious. She sneered, for years of marriage, be my husband by agreement. Fulfill your duties as a husband. During this period, you can work at ease. After 4 years, you will be free. At that moment, my world seemed to be turned upside down. There was no room for negotiation, and I was involved in this unexpected transaction. Now, there are still 3 months left before the 4-year deadline, but I chose to divorce. Because Wendy S. first love Tony is going back to China, I can't stand the fact that the woman I have lived with for 4 years is going to be sweet with another man. So I asked Wendy for a divorce. I think she must have been waiting for this day for a long time. After all, her family didn't agree with her being with her first love and asked her to go on a blind date and get married. In order to avoid her family's urging to get married, she chose me as a shield. But what I didn't expect was that when I filed for divorce, my wife suddenly changed her attitude. Think it over carefully. If you take the initiative to file for divorce, you have to pay me 2 million US dollars. You only have 6,000 yuan left. I will not give up this 2 million US dollars just because of 4 years of love. I nodded seriously and said calmly, let's get a divorce. If I wait until he comes back to get a divorce, my position will be awkward. Thank you for your care over the past 4 years. I will find a way to pay you back the $2 million I owe you within 2 years. She sneered with a hint of contempt in her eyes. Felix, I admit that you are a capable person, but making $1 million a year? This is an impossible task for you. Do you know how much trouble it will bring to me if you suddenly file for divorce now? If you can't pay the money within a year, I will send you back to prison without hesitation. Wendy's voice was cold and full of unquestionable threat. Actually, Wendy didn't want to get divorced. Over the past 4 years, she had gotten used to having Felix around. She wasn't sure if she was in love with Felix, but she seemed unable to live without him. It was just that Felix was determined to divorce her, and as a strong woman, Wendy would not show weakness in front of a man. I didn't refute, but just nodded gently, with a faint smile on my lips. Are you free today? Let's go to handle the divorce procedures in the afternoon. I knew that the contract between us had ended, and there was no need for any unnecessary emotional involvement. Wendy glanced at me, her eyes full of impatience and indifference. Okay, whatever you want. She turned around and didn't give me any chance with her arrogant attitude. In the afternoon, we arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau on time. The time to handle the divorce procedure was shorter than expected. Back then, we had to queue up for 2 hours to get married, but now it only takes 10 minutes. After getting the divorce certificate, we walked out the door. Wendy didn't even look at me and drove away indifferently. I stood at the door of the Civil Affairs Bureau, feeling mixed emotions, with a hint of bitterness in my eyes, thinking that this woman was really cruel. She didn't even have a breakup meal with me. She must be impatient to see her first love. However, before Wendy's car drove 200 meters, her cell phone rang. She parked the car on the side of the road, took a few deep breaths, and answered the call. A familiar yet unfamiliar voice came from the other end of the phone. Wendy, why did he answer the phone last night? I was happy to tell you that I would be able to return to China in a month, and the first person I wanted to tell was you. But after I finished speaking, he answered the phone and said lightly, I know. You have already. Wendy frowned, her tone full of impatience. Tony, what are you thinking about? My phone was left in the study last night, and he just answered the call. Don't be so sensitive. Do you have anything else to do? I'm busy. Before the voice on the other end of the line responded, Wendy had already hung up. She threw the phone back into the car, her face full of annoyance. Once upon a time, she still regarded Tony as the perfect lover in her heart. But now, the man who once made her heart beat only made her feel endlessly bored. Wendy continued driving, but the short conversation just now kept flashing in her mind. She frowned and suddenly realized that in the past 4 years, her relationship with Felix was no longer a simple transaction, but the misunderstanding and scars between them were so deep that they could not be repaired. She hated herself and hated that absurd marriage. But now, everything is over. She quickly dispelled the distracting thoughts in her mind and told herself to be sober and calm. She didn't know what the future would be like. Turning around, looking at the man squatting on the steps of the Civil Affairs Bureau smoking, Wendy frowned and whispered, "So, he can smoke." Wendy was in a terrible mood due to the divorce and Tony's phone call. She couldn't even get excited about going to work. Vice President 1, who had never been absent from work without a reason, was absent today for the first time. She drove all the way back to her parents' home, the Wynn mansion, and walked into the bedroom. Lee Jinha, who was lying on the bed, saw that his baby daughter looked wrong. Just as he was about to ask, Wendy rushed over and hugged him tightly. "Mom, Felix and I are divorced." Wendy's voice was tired and stubborn, as if declaring a silent victory. 12 o'clock in the evening, Wendy sat on the sofa in the Wynn family, facing her parents' repeated questions. Her mother-in-law usually doted on her only daughter, but today she was unusually silent, not standing by Wendy's side and letting her husband scold her. "Little Wendy, you really don't know how lucky you are?" My father-in-law slammed the table. His face turned pale with anger. "You have been married for almost 4 years. During these 4 years, you have been bullying Felix, and he has never complained. He really loves you and even takes care of us like his own parents. You are always busy with work, and he takes care of us when we are sick. Also, you are doing well at work, but who is silently helping you deal with these messes behind your back? Do you really think your computer will solve the problems automatically, or can you really sleepwalk through all the work? Which of your overtime cases was not done by Felix, who called your dad late at night to discuss it with you? No matter how late he works overtime every day, he will still get up the next day to make breakfast for you. He is so good to you. How can you divorce him?" Wendy's face gradually turned red, and she felt a sense of grievance and unwillingness in her heart, but she managed to hold it back. Wendy's mother saw this and became more and more angry. "Felix is so unlucky to have met an ignorant girl like you." Wendy finally couldn't stand it anymore, straightened her back, and angrily retorted to her father, "Am I your daughter, or is Felix your son? I tell you, it was Felix who filed for divorce first. I was the one who was dumped. Felix had initiated the divorce was like a heavy hammer." Wendy's parents stood there in disbelief. Wendy's father flew into a rage and took out his cell phone. "I want to ask Felix, why is my daughter not worthy of him?" However, before she could dial out, Wendy's mother grabbed her phone and sneered. "How dare you call Felix? Aren't you afraid that he will tell you that Wendy has someone else in her heart? Doesn't he know that your precious daughter has been waiting for that bastard Tony to come back?" At this moment, Wendy's father stared at his daughter with a cold and determined look in his eyes. "If you dare to be with that kid Tony, I will immediately take back all your shares and all your property. Then we'll see if Tony will kick you out." Wendy was so angry that her whole body was shaking. She glared at Lao Wen and said, "My mom gave me the shares. Can you take them back just like that?" "Lao Wen, do you dare to take them back?" At this time, Wendy's mother seemed to realize something. "Wendy, did you tell Felix that Tony was coming back, so he filed for a divorce with you?" "Wendy, men understand men best. Felix is a responsible man. Tony has been abroad for many years. Such places are more open. How can a man be honest abroad? Your mother and I will never agree to you being with Tony." Wendy's eyes were red. She glared at her parents and gritted her teeth stubbornly. "It's Felix who doesn't want your daughter now, not me who doesn't want him. Tony called me last night and said he was going back to his country and that he would marry me when he came back. Felix answered the phone, but this morning he asked for a divorce. Do you think I did anything wrong? Am I the one who wants a divorce?" "Felix, okay. You go find Felix and let him be your son." Hearing this, Wendy's mother was not moved at all. She sneered with mockery in her eyes. "Your little tricks, can't I, as a mother, see through it? Tony is coming back? That's great. Your house is under my name. I will sell it at half price tomorrow. Since you are divorced, just go home and live. If you dare not come back after 9 o'clock in the evening, I will break your legs. You could fall in love with anyone, but not Tony. I'm making this clear today. If you dare to date him, I have plenty of ways to make you break up." Wendy was so angry that she was shaking all over. She stood up without saying a word, turned around and rushed out of the house, tears in her eyes sparkling in the sun. She never wanted to come back to this home again. You can't go anywhere today. I'm going to find Felix now and ask him why he wants a divorce. Wendy, you'd better hope that Felix doesn't tell me the truth. After saying that, Wendy's mother stood up and gave her mother a threatening look. If you dare to let Wendy go out, you will not have a good life. Wendy's father was a soldier. He always spoke directly. If he wasn't a little more assertive, no one in the family would be able to control this girl. Wendy's father returned to the room, took out a property certificate, and glared at Wendy. If you don't want your second uncle to send troops to arrest you, then stay at home. I will sell the house tomorrow, and then you will go back home and live there. You are not allowed to go anywhere except to work. Seeing her angry husband, Wendy's mother felt wronged. My daughter, there is nothing I can do. You know your mother. She always keeps her word. At this moment, I was like a lost ghost, wandering aimlessly on the street. The phone in my pocket suddenly rang. I looked down and saw the two characters Yi on the screen. Suddenly, a cold sweat slid down my forehead. I was extremely reluctant to answer this call because I knew that Lee Jinho was a ruthless character. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and spoke carefully. Hello. How are you? You little bastard, just because I smiled at you, did you forget the rules? Try to pretend again? I'll call the army right away and have you, the little bastard, shot dead. Dad, I was wrong. I quickly admitted my mistake, my voice trembling. Well, that's more like it, she said in a slightly slower tone, but still without question. It's noon. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'll be waiting for you in the common people's kitchen. Let's talk about your divorce with Wendy. If you don't come, I'll go find you. Don't move your troops. I'll be there in 10 minutes? No, 5 minutes. After hanging up the phone, I was sweating profusely. Wen's father has never been someone you can easily mess with. Not only are Wendy and her mother wary of him, I've always been in awe of him. Even Tony, who is far away in a foreign country, is afraid of him. Who made him actually beat Tony up with his troops back then? It was a hot summer afternoon. The sun was blazing. Because I couldn't get a taxi, I jogged all the way. My clothes were soaked with sweat. When I finally pushed open the door of the private room, panting, my father-in-law was holding a mobile phone, as if ready to dial. Dad, are you looking for me in such a hurry? I didn't even dare to sit down, so I stood aside and asked respectfully. He glanced at me calmly and nodded. You still have some conscience. After the divorce, you still remember to take me, your father-in-law, seriously. Tell me, why did you divorce Wendy? Think about it before answering me, or I will really beat you into a sieve. I swallowed and whispered, Dad, I can't do this. I'm not a man. Let's go to the hospital now. I'll call Wendy right away and ask her to stay with you. I broke out in cold sweat again. My father-in-law is not an ordinary man at all, but a top boss in real life. His words can never be refuted. I definitely can't go to the hospital. If he finds out that I'm lying, I'll be killed. I sighed and confessed honestly, Dad, my marriage to Wendy was just a deal. My mother was ill, and I had no other options but to embezzle public funds. Wendy asked me to sign a 4-year marriage agreement with her so that she would not send me to jail. Now the contract is almost up, and I can no longer delay Wendy's youth. In front of my father-in-law, knowing that lying would only lead to my death faster, so I tried to take all the responsibility on myself. But I found that he didn't care about the details of the transaction at all, but frowned and stared at me. Is Wendy very old? No. I quickly shook my head. You're not old at all. My father-in-law glared at me unhappily and corrected me. You missed a word, Dad. You are not old at all. When you go out, you always say that you and Wendy are brother and sister. The father-in-law nodded in satisfaction and snorted. Marriage by agreement? I think you have been in love for the past 4 years. Wendy has many shortcomings. She is sloppy and quarrelsome, saying that she has misophobia. She has no life skills at all. Apart from her education and appearance, she has no advantages to show off. But you dare to say that you have no feelings for her? It's been almost 4 years. Even a dog would have feelings. I'm not saying that you are a dog. My father-in-law's words made me sweat on my forehead. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and replied with a wry smile. Dad, you know my background. If it weren't for Wendy having the upper hand, how would I have the chance to meet a girl like Wendy in my life? Marriage should always be based on equal status. Even if I like Wendy, it's useless because she has someone else in her heart. You mean Tony's little bastard? None of the men in Tony's family are decent? Isn't Tony just attracted by Wendy's shares? Only Wendy, a silly girl, really thinks her brother Tony will like her. The father-in-law sneered and continued. You divorced without informing me in advance. What should I do now? As soon as Tony comes back, Wendy, a silly girl, will throw herself into the fire. By then, will Wendy's life's hard work fall into the hands of the Lin family? I really regret not having a boy back then. Tony is not a good man. Do you have the heart to let Wendy marry a scumbag like him? I really didn't dare to respond. I couldn't nod or shake my head. I could only lower my head like a child who had done something wrong. Fortunately, my father-in-law didn't continue to make things difficult for me. He took out a wad of money from his bag and threw it to me. Divorce, then divorce. I'm not a conservative person. Here's 10,000 yuan. Take it and use it first. Don't let people look down on you. After saying that, my father-in-law stood up and patted my shoulder. Remember, Felix, no matter what, you have called me dad for the past 4 years. Now that you are not my son-in-law, you are still half my son. Wendy is narrow-minded. If you have more than 10,000 yuan in your hand, it means that I, Li Jinhe, have lived in vain. Take it and use it first, and don't think about leaving this city. If something happens to me and her mother in the future, you will have to come here to help. If you dare to refuse me, I will let the army find you. No rejection, no rejection. I was not willing to give up, and it was not a small amount, but I really didn't dare not take it. I had known my father-in-law's toughness for a long time. During the meal, my mother-in-law was pleased with me as her son-in-law. She squinted at me and said with a smile, "Do you want to go back to Changxiang Group? We can give you a position as the director of the planning department." I smiled helplessly and shook my head. "Mom, please stop joking. If I go back to Changxiang, who knows what Wendy will think? She might think I'm chasing her relentlessly. Since we're divorced, let's keep some distance. Besides, Changxiang's employees may not know the relationship between Wendy and me, but the top management has met me, so it's not appropriate for me to go back. And that man is coming back. After all, I'm Wendy's ex-husband. Seeing my ex-wife with someone else, I'll feel a little uncomfortable. Please let me live." The father-in-law sighed. A trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. You used all your pride on us, but didn't give Wendy, the little fool, any chance. She naively thought that you learned your skills from her. Since you insist on doing this, I won't force you. By the way, you're only 30 years old this year, right? I was stunned for a moment, then nodded and smiled. Yes, 30 years old. You're still young at 30. Don't rush into marriage. If you meet a girl you like, tell me. If soft tactics don't work, we can just use money to win over the girl. If it doesn't work, just bring in the troops, right? I responded and laughed. You are smart. The father-in-law nodded. But there is really no need to rush. Solve the problem first, then think about the future. You are right. Young people should have their own plans. Mom, it's time for you to go square dancing. This is the 4th time Aunt Zhao has called. I pointed at her cell phone. Just as the voice fell, the mother-in-law's cell phone rang again. She picked up the phone and started to curse. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Why are you old women rushing me? I'm rushing my son-in-law to have a meal. Just wait. I'm going to win all your money. Aunt Zhao's slightly teasing voice came from the phone. Hey, is Xiaoqun at your place? Bring him over so that I can cherish him. This boy is really good at cooking. My brother-in-law is not at home tonight. The mother-in-law immediately fought back. Bah, don't set your sights on my son-in-law. He's mine. Felix, your Aunt Zhao asked you if you were going. My mother-in-law smiled mischievously, and I quickly shook my head. No, I have something else to do in the afternoon. I have to go buy groceries for Wendy. After saying this, I was stunned. It turns out that habits are really hard to change. After dinner, I sent my mother-in-law downstairs. She waved and drove away in her low-key luxury car. Looking at her back as she went away, I stood on the street with a bit of bitterness on my face, but I secretly clenched my fists in my heart. I have to start a new life well. Let's go buy a pack of cigarettes first, I said to myself, smiling as I walked forward. After buying the cigarettes, I went directly to the agency to look for a new place to live and finally chose an ordinary 2-bedroom apartment. If I want to pay off the 2 million debt, it is far from enough to just save money. I must take action. At this time, Wendy was on the verge of collapse. The house was sold, and her father-in-law said indifferently, I lost the mahjong game to Zhao. This made Wendy tremble with anger, but she could do nothing because she had always kept a distance from Zhao since she was a child. The man who always liked her to call Sister Zhao often asked in a joking tone, How is my physical strength? Wendy, who had never experienced anything in life, didn't know how to respond. Wendy sat in front of the bed, her mind full of confusion. Did she really like Tony? Or did she just treat him as a spiritual sustenance? He had been abroad for 5 years, and during this period he had come back to see her no more than 5 times. Time had already faded the feelings she once had. When we first got married, she would chat with Tony all night. But gradually, the call time was shortened to 1 hour, and finally to a few minutes. And she even hung up hastily because I called her to eat. Of the month when Wendy was feeling the most miserable, I would get up early and cook fish head tofu soup or pork rib soup and put ginger and wolfberry water in a thermos for her to take to the office. Gradually, Tony's figure became blurred in her mind, while my presence became clearer and clearer. Wendy was frightened by this feeling. She couldn't accept that she would still think of me after being dumped by me. She felt devastated, grabbed her keys and phone, and rushed out of the house. She needed to vent, so she went to a bar she never wanted to go to. Wendy looked at this strange place, took a deep breath, and walked in. She had never been here before, and she was extremely resistant, but today she didn't care. As the glasses were empty one after another, Wendy's mind was filled with my shadow. The more she drank, the angrier she got. Why was her mind filled with Felix? He was good at cooking, keeping the house clean, washing clothes, being smart, and looking pretty good, but he was just SOSO in other aspects. Most importantly, he actually dared to file for divorce. Felix actually dumped me when he was already a little drunk and didn't realize that Tony was not in her mind at all. She gritted her teeth, tears in her eyes, and the emotions in her heart surged like a tide. This man, after the divorce, still occupied her heart. It's not the wine that makes people drunk. It's people who make themselves drunk. Hello, beautiful lady. Are you interested in doing me a favor and treating you to a drink? A middle-aged man with a greasy face and powdered hair approached with a smile. When he couldn't remember how many men had come to chat with her today, she just wanted to drink some wine quietly and forget about her troubles. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the other person. He was wearing branded clothes, and the watch on his wrist was shining with gold. Wendy sneered and said in a cold tone, "Do you have an annual salary of more than 6 figures? Do you have a watch worth millions? Do you have a relative at the deputy director level? Do I need a glass of wine from you?" The middle-aged man smiled awkwardly and turned away. He could tell that Wendy was not asking at all, but telling him that there was no chance for him here. Just as she was about to get up and leave, another man came over. "Sister, please give me some face. The brothers over there are watching us. Let's go over and have a drink. It's so boring to be alone." This time, it was a sloppy young man with dyed yellow hair and a frivolous smile on his face. Wendy's eyes turned cold, and she was about to refuse, but the man whispered, "Sister, your legs are so beautiful. Do you mind letting me touch them?" "Get out!" Wendy angrily poured the wine in her hand on his face. The young man's face changed instantly. He wiped the wine off his face and cursed with gritted teeth. "Stinky bitch." He was about to reach out to grab Wendy, but suddenly his wrist was tightly grabbed and he couldn't move. The man turned around suddenly and saw a sturdy little fat man standing behind him with a fierce look on his face. "Fighting here? Are you tired of living?" The little fat man looked at him coldly. "Don't think that a bar is a place where you can do whatever you want. Fighting has its rules. I'm here today. Don't even think about touching her." The young man stared at the little fat man and seemed to want to resist, but his friend saw that the situation was not good and hurried over to hold him. The little fat man snorted coldly, let go of his hand, and gave Wendy a kind smile. "Sister-in-law, why did you come here by yourself?" When he was a little drunk, she looked at the fat boy confusedly, blinked, and asked tentatively, "Are you Felix's brother?" The little fat man laughed and waved his hands. No, I'm his sworn brother. My last name is Ma. You can just call me Koexian. The bar is opened by my uncle's sister and others, and I usually help out here. Sister-in-law, this place is not very safe, especially if you come alone. I just called Felix, and he will be here soon." Hearing that Felix was coming, Wendy suddenly panicked. She stood up shakily. "No, I can't see him. I want to leave." Wendy staggered towards the door, but Ma Curson didn't dare let her go, and hurriedly stopped her. "Sister-in-law, it's useless for you to leave now. Felix will be here soon. It's not safe for you to drive here alone. If you leave now, who will be responsible if something happens?" The people around looked at Wendy's embarrassment, some whispered, and some just watched coldly. Ma Curson yelled at the thugs around him. "Do you guys really think I don't dare to do anything? Do you know who my sister-in-law is? Her uncle is from the Municipal Public Security Bureau. Do you guys want to die?" After hearing this, the hooligans immediately dispersed in dismay. The middle-aged man over there was a little disappointed to see that his chance to save the beauty had gone, but he did not leave in a hurry. Instead, he stood in the corner and observed everything with interest. "I want to see who this thorny rose belongs to." Wendy stumbled towards the door of the bar and bumped into the arms of a man who had just walked in. The man picked her up, and Wendy was stunned for a moment. When she looked up and saw the man's face clearly, she felt mixed emotions. Felix looked at her helplessly, without saying anything, and carried her out. The crowd gradually dispersed, and everyone understood. It turned out that the man had come. "How much have you drunk?" Felix looked down at Wendy in his arms, his tone somewhat reproachful. "Why did you drive to a place like this? If Koexine wasn't here, what would you do if something happened to you?" Wendy's face turned red, not because of the alcohol, but because of shame. She covered her face with her hands, not wanting Felix to see her embarrassed look. Felix looked at her and sighed helplessly. When he was about to leave, the middle-aged man suddenly blocked them. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't take her away. I have the responsibility to protect this lady's safety." The middle-aged man spoke in a calm tone, but with an unquestionable attitude. Felix sneered and hugged Wendy tightly in his arms. "I take my wife home. Does it have anything to do with you? Do you need to be responsible for her safety? We are both men. Don't act too noble in a place like this." The middle-aged man smiled and asked, "Who can prove that she is your woman?" Felix looked down at Wendy, who was already drunk and confused. He took out a divorce certificate from his pocket and threw it at the middle-aged man's feet. "Even if he is my ex-husband, he is more reliable than a stranger like you, right? Also, don't look at her with that kind of eyes. Just keep your eyes on me." The middle-aged man picked up the divorce certificate, took a look at it, and sighed. "So you are ex-husband and wife. Little brother, I'm so sorry." He took out a business card and handed it to Felix. "This is my business card. I hope we can have a chance to make friends." Felix didn't even look at the business card and said coldly, "No need. I'm divorced and I don't want anyone to bother my ex-wife. If you're interested, help me pick up the divorce certificate." After that, he ignored the middle-aged man and turned to leave with Wendy in his arms. As soon as they walked out of the bar, the cold wind blowing in their faces made Wendy sober up a little. She suddenly felt her stomach churning and couldn't help vomiting all over Felix. Felix stood in the cold wind, looking at his stained clothes, feeling a little overwhelmed. He gritted his teeth and said, "I should send you to Mom right now, so she can see you running to the bar to get drunk right after your divorce. Give me the car keys." Wendy was stunned for a moment and finally realized her mistake. She lowered her head and dared not look at him, but she couldn't help but shed tears. Felix looked at her, feeling angry and hurt. Finally, he sighed, gently put her in the car, and fastened her seat belt for her. "Let's go. I'll take you home." After he said that, he looked forward with a firm gaze, as if he had made some important decision. Wendy looked at me dazedly and struggled to mutter, "It's my mom, not your mom." "Then I'll take you back." I glared at her helplessly. "You left without your house key? Wendy, do you have no intention of going home at all?" She didn't answer, but curled up in my arms like a child who had done something wrong. After a while, I heard her sobbing softly. "Felix, I don't have a home anymore. My dad sold the house." My anger subsided instantly. My father-in-law really did what he said. Looking at Wendy in his arms, I didn't know what to say for a moment. The next morning, I woke up on the sofa. My whole body ached as if I had been run over by a car. What made me even more distressed was that the bed I hadn't slept on was already occupied by Wendy. Before dawn, Wendy's phone kept ringing. I picked up the phone in a daze, but I didn't expect to hear my mother-in-law's Buddhist lion roar from the other end. Her anger seemed to penetrate the phone line, making my eardrums buzz. "Listen to me, little girl. If you dare to sneak off to Washington, I will sever the mother-daughter relationship with you." Hearing my mother-in-law's roar, I quickly replied, "Mom, I'm Felix. Wendy is here with me." There was a sudden silence on the other end of the line, and then the call was hung up. I stared at the screen in confusion, and then a text message popped up. "Oldwin and I are going on a trip. Wendy can stay at your place. I'm also relieved. If you dare to call me, I'll be at your service." Before I could react, Wendy appeared behind me quietly. She glanced at her phone and said provocatively, "Are you checking my phone? I never saw you checking my phone before the divorce, and you didn't even ask about my phone calls with Tony. Now that we're divorced, you're interfering? Do you want me to help you check it?" I turned around and looked at her face, which had not been washed yet. I suppressed my anger, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. "Wendy, if you dare to drink again, I will definitely. Your mom and dad just sent me a message saying they are going on a trip and took the keys to the house with them. They asked you to stay with me, but we are divorced. I think it's better for you not to live with me, so as to avoid misunderstandings." Wendy poked half of her head out of the bathroom and winked at me. "I don't mind. It's not like we haven't lived together before. Felix, hurry up. I have to go to work today. I listened to her shameless tone and almost rushed into the bathroom with the pot to argue with her. What was this? Divorced, breached the contract, saddled with a debt of $4 million, and now living together again. My mind told me to resist. I took a deep breath and said, hurry up and wash up. I also want to wash up and go out. I have a new job interview today. As soon as the voice fell, Wendy poked her head out again, showing a curious expression. Felix, you washed my clothes when you came home last night? You might as well stop working and be my babysitter. I glanced at her helplessly. And then watch my ex-wife and her old love linger? Even if it's a marriage by agreement, I still have the dignity of a man. Old love? You mean Tony? Felix, are you jealous? I ignored her and left the kitchen with my breakfast, but Wendy kept asking, Felix, do you like me? I didn't answer, and Wendy continued to ask with a smile. Helplessly, I put down the breakfast in my hand, looked at her seriously and said, yes, I am jealous, but you have to eat breakfast now. Understand? Another unfortunate thing for me is that I have to start taking care of you again. Wendy raised her head proudly. It's your honor. Felix, you don't know, a lot of people approached me at the bar last night. Eat! I interrupted her impatiently. We were eating breakfast, and no one noticed the subtle changes in the way we were getting along. I was no longer respectful to Wendy, and she was no longer bossing me around like before. She obviously avoided talking about the bar, but when she heard me say that she was jealous, she seemed to be in a particularly good mood, as if the haze had been swept away and she didn't have the slightest objection to living here. I was wailing in my heart. This $4 million debt was really worse than the death of Zhao Ci's father. After dinner, I received an interview notice from the honor group, asking me to come over and chat when I have time. I walked to the honor group headquarters with trepidation. As soon as I walked to the building, a big red raptor suddenly whizzed past my nose, and I almost fell to the ground. When I came to my senses, the car had stopped in the distance, and a woman wearing a black hip skirt and high heels got out of the car. Her hot body and bold dress attracted a lot of attention, but to me, she was the murderer who almost killed me. I was about to step forward to question her, but I saw the woman jogging and disappearing into the door of Glory Group. I pinched my chin and muttered quietly, this woman doesn't look like a good person. The interview was held in an office in the HR department of Honor Group. I sat on a chair, facing 3 interviewers, 2 men and 1 woman. The female interviewer in the middle spoke first. Hello, my last name is Song, and I am the manager of the HR department. I will be responsible for getting to know you, and these 2 colleagues will evaluate your answers and experience to decide whether to hire you. The relationship between Honor Group employees and the company is a cooperative relationship, not an employment relationship. You should first understand the company's system before considering whether to continue the interview. Manager Song's attitude was very gentle, and his words were not arrogant at all, which made me feel very comfortable. After I carefully understood the company's system, I nodded to show my acceptance. Manager Song smiled and said, compared with Changxiang Group, our honor is more humane to our employees. Coming to work is not like signing a contract to sell yourself. Now we will start asking questions. If you are satisfied with us, we also want to be satisfied with you. Please introduce yourself first. I sorted out my thoughts and introduced myself briefly. My name is Felix. I'm 30 years old and divorced. I worked in the planning department of Changxiang Group for 6 years, participated in some small projects, and also participated in the planning of Honor Group. I only have a college degree and dropped out of college in my freshman year due to family changes. Excuse me, what is the reason for your divorce? Because my ex-wife's family background is so different from mine, I don't want to hold her back and want her to have a better future. If you were asked to devise a plan to fight against the Rongzhuang world, where would you start? I don't think it's necessary to target Rongzhuang world. It's a low-end brand whose target customers are middle-aged and elderly people. Rongzhuang world is just a strategy to save Changxiang department store. It's a transformation under helpless circumstances. Rongyao department store mainly makes profits from gold shops, luxury goods counters, and video game arcades. If it imitates Rongzhuang world, the effect will not be very good. One last question. Why did you leave Imagine Group? Is moving away from home a reason? I'll be left with nothing after the divorce. Manager Song nodded and smiled with satisfaction. Okay, we will give you an answer by tomorrow night at the latest. We look forward to working with Felix. I was still confused when I walked out of the office. As soon as I took a step, I remembered the Raptor downstairs, so I turned back and asked, is the Raptor downstairs the company's car? The faces of the 3 interviewers became embarrassed. Manager Song stood up and said apologetically, You are not injured, right? The car belongs to the company, but I smiled bitterly and waved my hands. It's okay. When I see the owner of the car, I will slap them both. She almost killed me in her high heels, and I can't stand it. After saying that, I turned and left, leaving the three interviewers looking at each other, wondering whether they should record the last sentence. While waiting for the elevator, I was still thinking about what happened just now, and suddenly felt that this was retribution after the divorce. I got divorced, and then I was scolded by my father-in-law, and then I was dragged back to life by Wendy helplessly. I was almost hit in the morning, and the interview was not smooth. The elevator door opened with a ding, and I walked in. As soon as I took a step, I bumped into a soft chest. Before I could see who was in front of me, I was punched in the stomach, and then a sharp curse rang in my ear. Don't you have eyes to look at? You dare to take advantage of me? You must be tired of living. Before I could come to my senses, she grabbed my hair. I was so angry that I reached out and grabbed her hair. She screamed and stepped on my foot hard, which made me grimace in pain. This time I saw clearly that the woman in front of me was the woman driving the Raptor, who almost hit me to death. Tell me which department you are from. I'm going to fire you right now. Let me go. Surrounded by the crowd, I lost my scruples and shouted angrily. I'm not from your company. You almost bumped into me downstairs just now, and I was just worried that I had no place to find you. Our movements quickly attracted onlookers, and the three interviewers in charge of the interview also rushed over. Manager Song was stunned when she saw the scene in front of her. She stepped forward quickly, desperately trying to separate us, and urged anxiously. Felix, let go. President Lee, let go too. Everyone is watching. Felix, let go first. President Lee is a girl. I gritted my teeth and let go, but I didn't expect that the woman didn't let go, but took the opportunity to bite my neck hard. Manager Song saw this and tried to dissuade her, and finally got her to let go. We both glared at each other in embarrassment, and General Manager Lee was so angry that she bent over and took off her high heels to hit me. Manager Song hugged her tightly and motioned for me to leave quickly. Felix, you go first. We will apologize to you on behalf of President Lee. I snorted coldly and walked into the elevator. What bad luck? Mr. Lee fixed his hair and asked coldly, Manager Song, do you know this person? Manager Song quickly helped her straighten her skirt and replied in a low voice. Mr. Lee, he came for an interview today and was almost... Mr. Lee waved his hand dismissively. I get annoyed just looking at handsome guys. Why keep him around? Tell him to come to work tomorrow. You grabbed my hair and dared to take advantage of me. I'll kill you. What's his name? Felix. Felix. It sounds familiar, but I can't remember it. By the way, Manager Song, tell the managers of the project department and the planning department to send me the results of that piece of land today. It's so annoying, more annoying than seeing a handsome guy. President Lee left, even lifting up her safety pants under her skirt. Everyone was angry, but could not say anything. This company was good in every way except that the general manager was a real problem. After leaving the company, I received a text message that I was accepted and was notified to report to the company on Monday. I had an inexplicable feeling in my heart, as if I was a sheep walking into a tiger's mouth, but I had no way out. Joining the Glory Group is the first and most important step in my plan. Only here can I find the opportunity to truly display my talents. Thinking of Wendy, I called my mother-in-law and asked her when she would be back. The call went through, but I heard the sound of a mahjong machine. Hello, Felix? Your mom is playing swimming. We are in Sanya. I suddenly felt my blood pressure soar. What travel? The old couple just didn't want Wendy to go back and disturb their world of two. They were trying to find a way for me to take care of Wendy, but I didn't dare to send Wendy back. After all, I was the one who filed for the divorce. Wendy's shadow reappeared in my mind. The 4 years of living together gave me a completely different understanding of her. Who would have thought that the vice president of Changxiang, who was a clean freak in the eyes of outsiders, was as sloppy as a pig at home? This duality made me laugh and cry. On the other side, in a luxurious villa, the mother-in-law just got off the mahjong table and went straight to the father-in-law. The mother-in-law frowned and sighed helplessly. Husband, do you think it's really okay for us to do this? Will Felix think that our daughter... The father-in-law handed the mother-in-law an orange slice and frowned, saying, there are a lot of twists and turns between the two children, and I have probably found out everything. Our little ungrateful bastard has long been accustomed to being served by Felix, so you don't have to worry about him. We have been observing Felix as character for 4 years, and you are still worried. At this time, Wendy also came home. Seeing me standing at the stairs staring at her, she said coquettishly, I'm hungry. I took a deep breath and asked calmly, are you planning to stay here for a long time? This is not a mansion like yours. This is just a small apartment. Wendy nodded vigorously. Felix, I was abandoned. I called my mother, but she didn't answer, and she even sent me text messages scolding me. Let me check the text message. Delete it, delete it. Are you trying to take this opportunity to check my phone? I spread my hands helplessly. I'm not interested. I'll show it to you. I'm going to the bathroom. Wendy clenched her fist and exclaimed, yeah, Tony was really blacklisted by her. There was no extra reason. She just didn't want that person to cause trouble for her again. If she liked the foreign girl, she could just continue to live abroad. She didn't bother to care. When I was washing vegetables in the kitchen, Wendy suddenly came in, put her hands behind her back, and looked at the ingredients in the sink curiously, muttering, hey, these are all my favorites. Aren't you afraid that I won't come back today? I continued washing the vegetables without looking up and whispered, you don't like the smell of the kitchen, so why did you sneak in? Wendy shrugged and muttered, I'm not picky about food. I can eat by myself even if you don't come back. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Then why don't you buy crabs? Wendy choked instantly, her face looking a little unnatural. In the 4 years of marriage, we only had one fight, and the reason was that Wendy bought crabs for me to cook, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I kept them in the fish tank. The next day, I saw Wendy standing in the kitchen, skillfully throwing lively crabs into the boiling water pot, splashing water. My face suddenly darkened, and those past events flooded into my mind like a tide. Was she deliberately provoking me? I walked out of the kitchen in silence. Wendy obviously realized that she had said the wrong thing. She stood there awkwardly, at a loss. She probably thought I would throw my hands up and strike, but a few minutes later, I came back with a box of yogurt in my hand. Go out and sit on the sofa and drink. Don't get in the way here. I waved my hand impatiently. After the divorce, I no longer had the patience to kowtow to Wendy. Although she was my creditor now, I knew in my heart that our relationship was no longer what it used to be. I knew Wendy had changed too, and her eyes no longer had the cold and superior look of the past. Wendy walked to the living room and sat on the sofa to drink yogurt. I continued to work in the kitchen, occasionally glancing at her sitting there, lowering her head and drinking yogurt seriously, and I felt a little warm in my heart. The distance between the two of us seemed to be shortened, as if we were back to those ordinary but windy days in the past. Felix, the large intestine will taste better if you put more chili in it. Wendy's voice came. I frowned and responded unhappily. Have you forgotten that winter when you were sent to the hospital for eating spicy food in the middle of the night? You almost died in bed from the pain. Wendy was stunned for a moment, recalling the embarrassing experience when she stubbornly asked for the spiciest boiled fish, which resulted in intestinal cramps. Injections and infusions were useless, and she could only drink water to get through the long night. Wendy moaned on the bed all night, and I stayed by her side and almost got into a conflict with someone because she disturbed other patients. Wendy smiled and whispered, then let's make it less spicy. Is there any soup? I want egg soup. Miss, if you are free, could you help carry the dishes up? I said half-jokingly. Okay, Wendy responded playfully and left the kitchen. I looked at her back and couldn't help but smile. Then my cell phone rang suddenly, and I picked it up in a hurry. It was an unfamiliar number. Hello. Sir, do you need door-to-door service? We are the best in the country. I hung up the phone directly. These days, there are so many scammers like flies that you can't even have a moment of peace and quiet. Dinner was 3 dishes and 1 soup. If Wendy hadn't been here, I probably wouldn't have cooked. We ate quietly at the table, as if we were back to the 3 years we spent together. After dinner, Wendy took the initiative to help wash the dishes. I went back to the sofa, turned on my computer, and prepared to study some materials. Wendy came over in casual clothes. Felix, let's go down for a walk. I'll give you a chance to protect the flower. Wendy said playfully. No, I answered without looking up. Felix, no, I have something to do. Wendy stamped her feet in anger, her face full of reluctance. She suddenly smiled sweetly and called out in a coquettish voice. Brother Felix, go away. If you keep acting coquettishly, I'll go downstairs. I compromised immediately because I couldn't resist her coquettish offensive. Wendy smiled smugly, turned around, and pulled me up. Let's go. We strolled in the neighborhood. Wendy, with her bare face and long legs, became the focus of passersby. I was beside her, and although I didn't feel ashamed, I felt more attention. When we reached the basketball court, Wendy yelled that she couldn't walk anymore and said she wanted to go to the supermarket to buy water. She asked me what I wanted to drink. I looked at the supermarket, then looked at my home and said casually, "I'll drink it when I get home." Wendy muttered miser and then trotted into the supermarket. She no longer looked like she couldn't walk as she had said before. Young people were playing basketball on the court, and one of them sprained his ankle. There was one less player on the court, and their eyes quickly fell on me. "Brother, come over and help me, and play a game." I was itching to play, so I took off my coat and joined them. I hadn't touched the ball for a long time, so I was unfamiliar with it at first. After I made 2 mistakes in passing the ball, I was despised. I am a stubborn person, and being despised actually boosted my fighting spirit. I took off my coat and went on the court again. As the sweat flowed, I gradually found my form. Layups, three-pointers, steals, assists, I could do almost everything except rebounds. Just when I was beginning to feel complacent, the atmosphere on the court suddenly changed. The young guys seemed to be energized, their speed soared, and some even started dunking. I looked back in confusion and found that Wendy was already sitting outside the court, answering a call on her phone. "My husband doesn't need house calls, he doesn't eat snacks." Wendy's voice came through clearly. A coquettish female voice came from the phone. "Oh, sister, you don't know which man doesn't cheat? How can a domesticated flower compare to the fragrance of a wild flower?" Wendy smiled coldly and retorted bluntly, "He doesn't eat wild flowers either." The other party was choked by this sentence. After a few seconds of silence, he seemed to take a deep breath to adjust his mood. "Don't be afraid, sister. I will attract him." Wendy continued with a smile. "Annie, you are very confident. My husband likes long legs. I happen to be 1.72 meters tall. Annie, are you over 1.70 meters tall?" The other end of the phone fell into silence, and then the call was hung up. My game was over, and I was completely beaten up in the last few minutes. The crowd watched me walk to Wendy, took the bottle of water she handed me, and drank it in one gulp. The beautiful girl has been taken. The young men on the basketball court couldn't help but sigh. Some shook their heads in disappointment, while others sat on the ground in disappointment, like eggplants hit by frost. I ignored their sighs and looked at the phone in Wendy's hand. I couldn't help but ask, "Who called just now?" Wendy smiled with curved eyebrows. "It was a harassing phone call. Seeing you being abused so badly, I couldn't bear to watch it, so I answered the phone to kill time." I shrugged helplessly. "Yeah, I'm old now, and my physical strength is gone." Wendy joked, "Having a beautiful woman next to you is more effective than stimulants. Let's go, or these kids will really treat you as a love rival." Just as he finished speaking, the young man who had dunked many times on the basketball court came over and said provocatively, "Brother, do you want a one-on-one duel?" I didn't refuse, but I was tortured to death. The young man was overjoyed, thinking that the goddess would look at him differently. However, when he turned around to look at Wendy, he found that she was smiling at me with her hands covering her mouth. When she looked at him again, Wendy's eyes were as cold as frost. After we left, the people on the basketball court lost interest in playing basketball and sat down on the ground with their heads down. The young man sighed and complained, "If you don't play basketball anymore, wouldn't it be better to find a girlfriend?" Everyone nodded in agreement. At the same time, in a high-end apartment in the city, a tall woman was standing in front of the mirror, gritting her teeth in anger. "Are you proud of being 1.72 meters tall? I am 1.8 meters tall, and I am considered short? My mother's ruler is not accurate. How come I measured 1.66 meters?" I lay down early, exhausted physically and mentally, and fell asleep the moment I closed my eyes. Wendy, who was sleeping in the master bedroom, was fiddling with my old-fashioned mobile phone out of boredom, looking at the few remaining numbers on it. She remembered the other party's reaction when she answered the call just now. The more Wendy thought about it, the more she felt something was wrong. Could it be that Felix has another woman outside? Did he hook up with her before the divorce? Although Wendy couldn't say she liked me, she still felt unhappy when she thought that I might have a new lover just 2 days after our divorce. The more Wendy thought about it, the angrier she got. She dialed a number. The call was quickly connected. Wendy immediately changed to a gentle tone and said with a smile, "Manager Lee, I'm sorry to bother you so late. Have you not rested yet?" Manager Lee on the other end of the phone quickly replied, it's okay. How can I not answer Vice President Wynn's call?" Wendy made a few pleasantries and then got to the point. "I heard that your lover works at a telecommunications company. I have a number here that I'd like you to help look up. It's not urgent. Just let me know when you have time." After hanging up the phone, Wendy's face returned to its previous gloomy state. About half an hour later, Manager Lee called back. In order to check the number, he asked her husband to go to the company in the middle of the night. As a result, the phone number had extremely high authority and the registrant could not be found. Despite this, Wendy still gave managerly 2 days off, but only 4 days were counted as the weekend. Wendy sat on the bed, looking at the strange number on her phone, and whispered, "It's actually a premium user. How can the number be so mysterious, like a playing card?" The following weekend was very dull. Wendy returned to her married temper and locked herself in her room, busy with the work at hand. There was a piece of land in an old community in the city that was going to be put up for bidding, and she was afraid that the land would be forced to Changshan Group. The assessments of the investment department and the risk department both believed that it was a loss, so Wendy was under great pressure. I was too lazy to pay attention to Wendy. I was busy looking up the information I needed downstairs and occasionally exercising in the afternoon. The guys on the court were a little resistant to me, thinking that I was showing off, and few wanted to play with me. The 2 days of the weekend were like a year for me. I knew that every minute was precious. After all, the debt of 4 million was suffocating me, but it also made me feel a kind of excitement and unwilling pride. On Monday morning, Wendy hurriedly ate breakfast and went to work. Before leaving, she asked me if she wanted me to go with her, but I shook my head and said no. My mother-in-law seemed to have really forgotten this beautiful girl. She didn't call me at all, and Wendy didn't answer the phone either. I started to wonder, it's fine if my mother-in-law didn't call, but why didn't Tony say anything? Did Wendy really block him? What the hell is she doing? Little did I know that on the other side of the ocean, a grown man was lying on the bed in a daze. Tony couldn't understand what Wendy was thinking. Why did she block him just like that? I called Lee Jinha, and the answer I got was that the young couple went on a makeup honeymoon. Tony was almost vomiting blood out of anger and thought that he would settle the score with Felix first after returning home. How could he let this mud leg steal his woman? The next day at work, I learned my lesson and stopped crossing the plaza of Glory Group. I could be hit by Mr. Lee at any time. The 4 years with Wendy taught me the difference between rich and poor people, and also made me resistant to beautiful women. Wendy once said that 90% of single women in the world are sloppy, which completely shattered my fantasy of beauty. Passing through the gate of honor, the company's employees have already arrived at their posts. I walked to the front desk in my new suit, took out my ID card, and received the employment contract. After signing, the girl at the front desk handed me a piece of candy and smiled sweetly. "Welcome to Honor Group. This piece of candy is a greeting gift from the company, which means forgetting the bitterness of yesterday. Working at Honor is sweet." I was about to reply when I was interrupted by a cold rebuke. "Are you all free? Have you finished your work? If you have nothing to do, run around the company 20 times. Don't act like a corrupt person with a bulging belly. It will damage the company's image." I looked back and saw that it was indeed Ms. Lee. She was dressed very exquisitely today and had an unquestionable aura. I looked at her and thought to myself that this woman was indeed quite troublesome. Just as I was about to leave, Mr. Lee suddenly grabbed my arm, snatched the contract from my hand, glanced at it, and then gave the girl at the front desk a lecture on traditional Chinese culture. The girl lowered her head, her eyes red, and obviously didn't know what she had done wrong. "Planning department? Who told you to assign Felix to the planning department? How many times have I told you? General Affairs Department. General Affairs Department." CO Lee roared, then glared at me. "Felix, report to the General Affairs Department, and the contract will be delivered to you soon. Don't be an eyesore now. I'm very upset today." "Mr. Lee, I'm applying for a position in the planning department." I try to argue. "I'll ask you to go to the General Affairs Department now. The salary in the General Affairs Department is 1,000 more than that in the Planning Department, and bonuses will be paid as usual." Mr. Lee waved his hand impatiently. "Okay, Mr. Lee." I nodded tactfully. After all, she came with bad intentions, and there was no need for me to go against her. Just as I turned around and prepared to leave, Mr. Lee reminded me coldly, "Your clothes are almost exposed." I looked back at her and said calmly, "I'm wearing safety pants. Get out." Ms. Lee was obviously not irritated by me, but I had a new understanding of her toughness. When I left, I heard her scolding the girl at the front desk again, and then handed her a 200 yuan bonus, plus 2 hours of vacation. A typical sharp tongue, but soft heart. When I arrived at the General Affairs Department, I did not encounter any difficulties. I spent the whole morning observing the atmosphere of the General Affairs Department. Most people here had nothing to do, and many of them watched movies or played games. At noon, after finishing my meal, I was about to take a break when I heard a crisp voice. "Sister Yang." I looked up and saw a 3-no Lolita in a professional suit jumping into the General Affairs Department. She didn't feel proud for long, because she was frightened by Sister Yang's dry cough and hugged the arm of Yang Lan, the head of the General Affairs Department, and shouted in a tender voice, "Sister." Yonglon looked at her helplessly. Why are you here again? Ms. Lee knows that you are not with her. Be careful and get punished. The little girl stuck out her tongue and retorted, I didn't run away secretly. Mr. Lee asked me to find someone. Sister, who is Felix? Mr. Lee asked me to find him. Everyone in the office instantly focused their attention on me. I was wondering, this woman is too vindictive. Su Liang next to me whispered to me, Felix, can you come back alive? I smiled unhappily and patted Su Liang on the shoulder. Don't worry, it's really possible. Little Lolita Yang Jia came over, looked me up and down, then said with a giggle, It's you. You're pretty handsome. No wonder you were hired, even though you fought with Mr. Lee. Let's go, Mr. Lee's office is at the back of the 14th floor. I sighed helplessly, thinking that since I couldn't avoid it, I would just face it head on. After entering the general manager's office, Mr. Lee said coldly, without even looking up, You're here? Mr. Lee, do you have something to talk to me about? I stood at the door, trying to stay calm. I'm not looking for you. Who let you in? Mr. Lee looked up at me and continued in a cold voice. I won't beat around the bush with you. Since you pulled my hair, I will torture you. If you can't stand it, get out and I will triple your salary as compensation. If you can stand it, just clean the office. This is one of the jobs of the General Affairs Department. I gritted my teeth and said calmly, Okay, Mr. Lee, I'll go get the mop and rag right away. My indifference surprised Ms. Lee. She stared at me for a long time, then picked up the document on the table and continued reading. But as she flipped through the department's planning proposal, her expression became more and more unsightly. Finally, she slammed the document on the table, kicked her high heels aside, and cursed in dissatisfaction. I picked up the documents and put them back on the table, and she angrily pushed them to the ground again. I didn't waste any words and threw all the documents into the trash can and threw her high heels in with it. Mr. Lee was so angry that his eyes widened and he shouted in a high-pitched voice, Felix, are you sick? How dare you throw my shoes? Carry me home. I continued cleaning without looking back. I can't carry him. Does the General Affairs Department still have the responsibility to carry the general manager home? Mr. Lee was so angry that he was gasping for breath. You are awesome. I am stupid and I raised a bunch of trash. I'm not a waste. Your being an idiot is your business. I responded coldly. Are you here to cause trouble? Felix, don't think I won't fire you. Mr. Lee, do you think I'm here to apply for a housekeeping job? Even a clay man has a temper. I'm immune to beautiful women, thanks to Miss One. I smiled indifferently. Ms. Lee was so angry that her chest was heaving violently. Her fingers were shaking as she almost dialed the number of the HR department. She took a deep breath and finally endured it. She watched me continue to clean the office. When I cleaned up the sanitation, she said angrily, Felix, you can throw away these plans and go back to the General Affairs Department. Okay, Mr. Lee. I responded calmly. Just as I was walking out of the office, Mr. Lee suddenly shouted, Felix, you bastard, give me my shoes back. I turned around and stared at the high heels in the trash can with a little embarrassment on my face. Ah, Mr. Lee, I put it here for you. Mr. Lee's voice suddenly became low. Felix, do me a favor. I looked down in surprise, looking at the documents and the trash can in my hands. I immediately understood what she meant and asked softly, How about trying it out? Mr. Lee smiled bitterly and nodded. I have no other choice now. The people in the planning department and the project department have tried their best, and the General Affairs Department cannot be relied upon. If I fail this time, I will have no way out. I nodded. I am the most expensive sausage, and money is the most attractive to me. If you can give me a satisfactory reward, I will help you. If you can guarantee that the project will not result in losses, I will pay you $200,000 in one lump sum through a high-level meeting. Mr. Lee's tone became much more serious. Give me some time, a week at most. It's too late. There are only 2 days. Mr. Lee looked at me anxiously. Double it, I replied calmly. In the evening, I returned home and opened the door to see Wendy lazily lying on the sofa, eating potato chips. I pinched my brows helplessly. Does this look like she's starving to death? Wendy saw me. She immediately put away the potato chips, knelt on the sofa and shouted, I'm hungry. She also threatened to call my mother and say that I was abusing her. I took a deep breath helplessly. Today is my first day at work, and I'm quite busy. I haven't adjusted yet. Don't call my mother. A few days ago, she asked us if we would go back home for the new year. If she knew we were divorced, you might be fine, but I might die. Oh, it's still a long way to go before the new year. Stop nagging me. I'm really starving. I bought some food, and it's in the kitchen. Go and make it, or I'll tell Mom that you were the one who filed for divorce. Wendy kept calling my mom, but I didn't mind and quietly walked into the kitchen to start preparing dinner. While cooking, I suddenly remembered the work that Mr. Lee had assigned to me, so I asked Wendy about the glory group and the bidding. Wendy said unhappily, "Don't think about those useless things. Think about how to pay me back first. I get angry when I think about you divorcing me." I sighed and said helplessly, "I want to eat 4 dishes and 8 plates today. There are eggshells. Do you want to eat them?" "Felix, you've changed. Do you have a dog outside? You don't even give in to me now." Wendy complained as she moved closer to me with a coquettish and dissatisfied look in her eyes. I ignored Wendy. During the meal, she stepped on my feet frequently, but I didn't pay much attention. After the meal, I washed the dishes, and Wendy went upstairs angrily. I didn't understand why she was suddenly angry, because I didn't provoke her. When I finished my housework and went back to the second floor to continue reading materials, Wendy suddenly opened the door and pounced on me in her pajamas, hitting and biting me. After pinning me to the ground and declaring victory, she left triumphantly and took my phone away, saying bluntly, "Divorce also requires a cooling-off period. I blocked Tony, so you should behave yourself. You dare to hook up with other women behind my back, pay me back now." Wendy with despair and said calmly, "What fool would choose a man with a debt of 4 million? Besides, I don't even have WeChat. Who can I hook up with? You canceled my only QQ account. When you come here, we need to have a good talk. You beat me up without any explanation. You have to give me an explanation, right?" When he dialed a number, and I saw that she had used my phone to call my mom. She opened her eyes wide and yelled, "Mom, Felix wants to beat me up." The matter became a big deal. I never expected Wendy to call my mom. I quickly put down everything I was doing and explained, "Mom, don't listen to Wendy's nonsense. We were just joking. We didn't hit her." My dad snatched the phone away and started to scold me without saying anything. He said that he had not achieved much in his life, but he had one good thing. He had never asked my mom to cook and had never been angry with her. When he heard that I was going to beat my wife, he was not happy. Finally, I begged Wendy to testify, and the matter was settled. My mom gave an order. "You two must go home for the new year this year." After hanging up the phone, I collapsed on the tatami, staring at the ceiling, and said weakly, Okay. Now Mom wants us to go home for the new year. If you don't go, Mom will definitely find out everything. If she knows we're divorced, you'll lose your first base." Wendy sat cross-legged beside me, curled her lips, and said disdainfully, "Look at your lack of ability. I go back to see Mom? What does it have to do with you? Mom treats me much better than Lee Jinha. Go away. Go take a shower. You won't sleep with me tonight. I'll wash Wendy. You're a dog. You're a mouthful of Wendy." I helplessly watched Wendy making a fuss, and she suddenly jumped on me again, and I realized that she just lacked a little sense of security. When she was making a fuss with me, Tony was boarding a plane back home. He couldn't wait any longer. As a man with a debt of 4 million, I knew I had to do my best, and Glory Group was my only chance. I didn't take the initiative to get to know other people in the general department because I knew that the helpers I had now were enough. Just as I was concentrating on writing the plan, a man in his 40s came over. His suit belt was like a bag holding his stomach. He patted my shoulder and said softly, "It's good for young people to be aggressive, but they also have to know the rules and don't step on others to get to the top." I smiled in response, didn't say anything, and continued with the work at hand. Seeing that I ignored him, the middle-aged man reached out to take the documents on the table. I quickly held down the documents, frowned, and asked, "Before touching other people's things, it's better to ask. I am the Deputy Director of the General Affairs Department and have the authority to check employees' work progress and prevent them from being lazy," he said confidently. "Then why don't you go and watch those people playing games and watching movies? If you delay my work again, I will ask Sister Yang to report to Mr. Lee and say that you disturbed me and prevented me from completing my work." Lu Jilong obviously didn't expect me to be so uncooperative. Just as he was about to continue to attack, Yang Lan opened the door of the office and frowned at us. "Deputy Director Lu, don't disturb Felix." The work in his hands was assigned by General Manager Lee. Lu Jilong responded twice in embarrassment, and Yang Lan continued, "Everyone, please put aside your work. Recently, other departments have a lot of opinions about our General Affairs Department, and the integration of the General Affairs Department has been mentioned at the high-level meeting. If you really have nothing to do, study, make tables, and practice calligraphy. Deputy Director Lu, do you have anything else to do?" "It's okay, Sister Yang." Lu Jilong turned and left awkwardly. Yang Lan didn't say anything more, turned around, and went back to the office, leaving us staring at each other. After Yang Lan returned to the office, I said with a hint of ridicule, Vice President Liu, it is immoral for a married woman to be with you. Liu Jiulong curled his lips. What do you know? It's not easy for Lan Lan to raise a child alone. I feel sorry for her. Sister Yang is single. I continued to joke. Liu Jiulong suddenly looked at me seriously and asked, do you have any ideas? At this time, a dry cough was heard in Yang Lan's office. Liu Jiulong immediately calmed down and smiled awkwardly. Liu Jiulong seemed to have forgotten about targeting me. He casually pulled over a chair, rested his chin on one hand, and stared at Yang Lan's office with deep affection. He was still an affectionate guy. As I had just arrived at the company, I had to take on this difficult problem. Even Mr. Lee didn't know how capable I was. Yang Lan would also give some face to people who were favored by Mr. Lee. I spent the whole afternoon writing the plan. When I got off work, Wendy sent me a text message. I took a look and was about to put down my phone, but after thinking about it, I called back. I may be home a little late tonight, about 1 or 2 hours later. Don't order takeout. Wait for me to go back and make it for you. Felix, I feel a little unwell. Please come back early after you are done. Okay, I got it. After hanging up the phone, I didn't think much and continued to concentrate on the work at hand. I don't know how long it took. When I felt a little back pain, I found that my phone was missing. I searched all over the floor and finally found the phone in the gap under the table. Looking at the 3 missed calls on it, 2 were from Wendy and 1 was from my father. I was stunned. My mother was with my father, and it was my mother who called when there was something important. I called Wendy first, but no one answered after calling twice in a row. I panicked, remembering that 2 years ago, a pervert broke into Wendy's house and took advantage of the opportunity to repair the sewer to do something to Wendy, and I got a cut on my shoulder. My mother, while running, I thought it was Wendy who called my mother, but she just asked me when I would go back for the new year. It was over. Something happened to Wendy. The more I thought about it, the more panicked I became. As bad as it was, when I went back, the elevator had a sign on it. This is the case with ordinary apartments. The elevators often need maintenance. I ran all the way up the stairs to the top floor and opened the door with trembling hands. When I entered the room, the lights were off and there were no signs of fighting. I opened Wendy's door. She looked at me dazedly with her eyes open. Her face was still a little pale. I found her curled up. Her 1.72-meter tall figure was curled up into a ball. I nervously went over to hug Wendy and said gently, "Why don't you turn on the lights when you are home? Why don't you answer the phone?" When my hand touched her head, I panicked again. Wendy was sick. Her forehead and body were very hot. I carried her on my back and walked down the stairs to the first floor. It was raining heavily at the time. I was so poor that I didn't even have a normal car, so I could only call a taxi. The cold raindrops soaked my clothes instantly. I gritted my teeth, took off my coat, and put it on Wendy, wrapping her tightly. After getting in the car, on the way to the hospital, I couldn't help but feel bitter. Wendy doesn't have many friends, but I can't do anything at this time. I can't tell Lee Jinha. I can't tell Lao when she's alone with me. Thinking of the phone call from Wendy when she was working overtime, she clearly said that she was not feeling well, but I didn't take it seriously. At this moment, I just wanted to slap myself hard. It wasn't until Wendy was hung up within 4 that my heart settled a little. The doctor gave me some instructions, and seeing that I was soaking wet, he kindly suggested that I go home and change into clean clothes before coming back, and he would stay here. But I shook my head and rejected the doctor's kindness. Looking at Wendy, who was already asleep, I felt bitter and helpless, and finally decided to call my mother-in-law. "Hello, Felix. Why are you calling so late? What is this little ungrateful bastard doing?" The familiar voice of my mother-in-law revealed a little fatigue, but still concerned. "No, Wendy is fine. I accidentally gave her a fever. I'm with her in the hospital now, getting in 4 drip." I tried to keep my voice calm so as not to worry her too much. My mother-in-law's tone immediately became tense. "Do you want me to come over?" No, it's just a common fever. I didn't take good care of her, so I thought I should tell you." I quickly declined her suggestion. "I'm glad you're okay. Call me if you have any problem." My mother-in-law breathed a sigh of relief, and her voice became gentler. After hanging up the phone, I touched the raindrops still dripping on my forehead and walked into the hospital restaurant. I was soaked and became the focus of attention in the restaurant. Many passers-by pointed at me. I didn't care. I just found a seat and bought a bowl of porridge and a few side dishes. When I returned to the ward, Wendy had woken up and looked around in a daze, with confusion and bewilderment in her eyes. Seeing me come in, she was obviously relieved, but still proudly hid herself in the quilt, pretending not to see me. I chuckled and put the porridge on the small table. After a while, Wendy finally couldn't help but crawl out from the quilt, looked at the porridge carefully, and finally her appetite overcame her temper, and she drank it in small sips. I stood by the window, looking over the glass at the dense raindrops outside. The sound of rain blocked out everything, and my thoughts were erratic. What kind of relationship do Wendy and I have now? We are divorced but still live together. We are more familiar than strangers, but not as close as lovers. It's like living together. Each of us has our own thoughts. When I heard Wendy put down her dishes, I turned around and saw that she had shrunk back into the quilt, looking like a small bun. The nurse came in to deliver medicine and warm water. I didn't say much, but just quietly put the medicine on her bedside table and whispered, "Remember to take the medicine." Wendy didn't respond. She closed her eyes and seemed to have fallen asleep again. My heart also calmed down. The sound of rain gradually became the background sound. Wendy's steady breathing made me feel at ease. Standing by the window, I supported myself on the windowsill with both hands. The 3D model of the plan emerged in my mind involuntarily. My thoughts gradually became clear. I knew that everything was going according to plan now. As long as I put these ideas on paper, the task would be completed. Tomorrow is enough. Wendy turned over gently, and I looked back at her, and suddenly I felt a little relieved. The debt weighed on my shoulders, but at this moment it was not as heavy as I had imagined. I sighed softly, sat back in the chair beside Wendy's bed, closed my eyes, and let my thoughts intertwine in my mind. Felix's thoughts were interrupted by Wendy's voice. I turned my head and looked at her in confusion. There was a hint of fatigue and impatience in her eyes. "What's wrong? Or do you feel uncomfortable?" I asked softly. Wendy just shook her head and said simply, "I'm going to sleep. Turn off the light." "Okay," I responded, and without thinking too much, I turned off the light. At this moment, I didn't have the energy to care about Wendy's mood. I just wanted her to have a good rest. The ward fell into silence. I sat aside. My mind was a mess, like a ball of paper wet by rain. Unconsciously became confused. After a long time, my mind went blank, and the ringing of the mobile phone suddenly interrupted my thoughts again. This time it was Wendy's phone that rang, and I remembered that she had been holding the phone at home. Seeing the strange number displayed on the screen, I frowned and hung up the phone directly. Unexpectedly, just 2 seconds later, the phone called again. I glanced at Wendy, who was sleeping soundly, and secretly groaned in my heart. I didn't know why the phone was muted, so I had to bite the bullet and answer the call. "Wendy is not available to answer the phone right now," I said in a low voice. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds, and then the other end's voice came. "Who are you? Why are you holding Wendy's phone at this time?" I immediately recognized the voice, Tony. When I heard him say Wendy, I felt annoyed for some reason, and I responded coldly, "Felix." When the other party heard my name, he immediately flew into a rage. "Felix, you bastard, stay away from Wendy. You two are divorced." I couldn't help but laugh and said sarcastically, "What's it to you? Tony, you're like a dogskin plaster. Let's talk about it tomorrow." After that, I hung up the phone without hesitation. Before I took a few steps, my cell phone rang again, and the unfamiliar number was still on the screen. I hung up in frustration, but Tony kept calling again and again, as if he was possessed. Until I couldn't stand it anymore, I answered again. This time, before I could say anything, Tony yelled, "Felix, don't let me catch you. I will make you regret it. Tony, I beg you, come and catch me. Come and catch me." I roared into the phone, venting all my anger in this one sentence, then hung up the phone again, standing there taking deep breaths, trying to calm the anger in my heart. I don't know why, but I get angry when I hear the name Tony, especially when I hear him calling Wendy's name affectionately. I can't control my anger. I glanced at Wendy's phone, and there was a button on the left side, which should be turned off if pressed for a long time. I was about to press it, but I heard Wendy's weak voice. "Don't turn it off." Wendy's eyes slightly opened, and there was a hint of fatigue in her voice. "I actually haven't fallen asleep yet. From the time you carried me downstairs until now, I have been awake." Hearing her voice, my hands froze in midair. Wendy looked at me and smiled faintly. "Don't pay attention to him. He just likes to hold on to things." I handed her the phone in silence. Wendy took it, turned it off decisively, and threw it aside. She turned her head and looked at me, as if waiting for me to say something. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "I'll go shopping with you tomorrow." Wendy nodded, looking somewhat relieved. "I haven't gone shopping in several years. The last time was when Tony was not abroad." She paused and added, "He asked me to go to his house for dinner with his parents tomorrow, but I don't want to go." I didn't think much about it and agreed directly. Okay. Wendy looked at me. She liked my straightforward attitude the most. A yes always made her feel at ease. However, I ignored the fact that tomorrow was my last day and I needed to submit the proposal. But because of this yes, I put all my plans on hold. The next morning, before Wendy was discharged from the hospital, she suddenly asked me, "How much money do you have?" I was stunned for a moment, and after searching for a long time, I finally took out 31 yuan from my pocket. The two stood at the door of the ward and stared at each other for a long time. Wendy shook her head helplessly, turned around, and walked into the ward, shouting as she walked, "Then I will call Mom and tell her that I am sick and you don't take care of me." "Stop!" I quickly stopped her. "I don't have much money, but I still have the card with me. There are still several thousand yuan in it." Wendy looked at me suspiciously and frowned. "Do you dare to be poor?" I smiled bitterly and spread my hands. "Of course I can. There's a person living in my house who only eats and does not work. I have to buy snacks, vegetables, and towels for him, and he's picky about food every day. He was hospitalized last night, and when he didn't bother to listen to my complaints, she suddenly put my head under her armpits and covered my mouth with her hands. "Can you stop talking nonsense?" I rolled my eyes helplessly. I came to the hospital soaked to the skin last night, and today I was taken away by the girl with my head clamped between my legs. The nurses looked at us and whispered, "It's so annoying to compare yourself with others." His girlfriend only had a high fever, but he rushed her to the hospital regardless of the weather. "Don't be jealous. I was on duty last night. The man was soaked to the skin and was busy buying porridge. His girlfriend only had her hair wet. There was only one bed and one chair in the private ward, and the man stayed with her all night without sleeping. He's so handsome and has such a high appearance. Do you think that woman is simple? The Cartier bracelet on her wrist is enough to keep us from eating or drinking for 3 years." The nurses sighed with envy. "She is beautiful and rich, and her boyfriend treats her like a treasure. They are both human beings. Why is there such a big difference?" The next day, the sun was already high in the sky. Wendy was wearing pajamas. I drove her car to pick her up from the hospital. She lazily leaned on the passenger seat. I glanced at her and asked, "Where are you going?" "Glory Department Store. Let's see what's so good about them." She looked out the window board. "Wear a mask. Others may not recognize you, but people at Honor will definitely know you, the famous president one." I reminded him half-jokingly, "It's the negative president." Wendy curled her lips, looking indifferent. I smiled helplessly and concentrated on driving. Wendy quietly opened her handcuffs and took out a bank card from it. It was the private money she had quietly saved over the years. The car fell into silence. Our relationship seemed to have quietly changed, but no one pointed out this subtle feeling. At the same time, in the General Affairs Department of Honor Group, Mr. Lee's anger had spread to the entire office. Mr. Lee sat at my workstation with a dark face and a cold expression, as if he would explode at any time. Su Liang stood outside the door, saying that Mr. Lee's place was good, but he was scared to death. No one in the office dared to watch movies or play games anymore. Everyone lowered their heads and pretended to be busy working. Yang Lan and Lu Jiulong stood cautiously behind Mr. Lee, while little Yang Jia had already been sent out to contact me. Half an hour later, little Yang Jia came back dejectedly, speaking timidly. "Mr. Lee, Felix's phone is off." Bang! Mr. Lee slammed his hand on the table and shouted angrily, "You can't think of another way after the phone is turned off? You have to come to me for instructions on everything. I asked you to come here to solve the problem, not to cause trouble." Little Yang Jia was so scared that she turned and ran away like a little rabbit. Mr. Lee's anger towards me did not subside. I dared to confront her during the interview, threw her shoes on the first day of work, was late on the second day, and simply disappeared on the third day without even asking for permission. Yang Lan did not dare to defend me, and she did not understand what I was trying to do. Lu Jiulong rolled his eyes, thinking this was a good opportunity, and quickly flattered, "Boss Lee, Felix doesn't take the company's rules seriously at all. He takes more than an hour to eat lunch and always goes out to smoke. It's better to fire him." In the General Affairs Department, except for Su Liang and Yang Lan, everyone else had an expression of gloating on their faces. Yang Lan suddenly thought of something and hurried back to the office to take out a document and handed it to Mr. Lee. "Mr. Lee, this is the planning draft that Felix made yesterday. I read it and I think it's pretty good." President Lee sneered, flipped through the documents fiercely, and glanced at them briefly. Her face became worse and worse, and she slammed the documents on the table, pointed at Lu Jiulong, and cursed. "Fire Felix? Can you replace him?" All of them play games and put on makeup. What's the use? Fire him. Can you do it? She looked around, her anger still lingering. Are you all deaf? Can't you hear what I say? If you don't want to work, write a resignation letter, and I'll give you 3 times your salary. Lu Jilong didn't dare to say anything and ran out in a hurry. He understood that Mr. Li was really angry this time. Yang Lan stood there, lowered her head, and tears fell on the floor, like a little girl who had been wronged. President Li looked at Yang Lan, and her heart softened a little. She sighed and patted Yang Lan on the shoulder. Don't cry. You are the only ones in the company who can be considered confidants, but this Felix is too unruly. When he comes back, you should discipline him well, just like you did with little Yang Jia. Do you hear me? Yang Lan nodded and tried to stop crying. I understand, Mr. Li. President Li rubbed her temple helplessly, picked up the documents, and left the office. As soon as she left the office, she saw Lu Jiulong coming back and handed her a tissue with a flattering look on his face. Don't cry, Lan. I'll go find Felix. He will definitely not run away. Yang Lan wiped her tears and forced a bitter smile. Thank you, Jiulong. The General Affairs Department of the Honor Group was in complete chaos. People from all departments came to watch the fun. Everyone was waiting to see the joke of the problematic newcomer Felix. At this time, I was leisurely shopping with Wendy in a department store and knew nothing about the outside world. Bang! With a loud noise, Yin Qingqing slammed the table, glaring at everyone present with anger, her voice cold. Don't you know how to think of other ways to turn off the phone? You have to come to me for instructions on everything. I asked you to come here to solve the problem, not to cause trouble. Her roar echoed in the office, and everyone was silent. Xiao Yang's eyes widened, and she immediately turned around and ran out, her legs moving very fast. Yin Qingqing's anger seemed to have not subsided, especially when she thought of Felix, who dared to fight with her during the interview. Threw her shoes on the first day of work, was late on the second day, and didn't come on the third day without any explanation. Her anger was churning in her chest, and she could explode at any time. Yang Lan stood aside, not daring to speak for Felix. He himself did not know what was going on with this young man. At this moment, Lu Jiulong rolled his eyes, as if he saw an opportunity, and smiled flatteringly. Boss Li, this Felix simply does not take the company's rules seriously. He can spend more than an hour eating lunch and always goes out to smoke. It is better to just fire him. As soon as these words came out, everyone in the office except Yang Lan and Su Liang showed a gloating smile. It seemed that everyone had been displeased with Felix for a long time. However, Yin Qingqing's face became even darker. She threw the documents on the table fiercely, pointed at Lu Jiulong, and cursed. Fired Felix? If you guys were better, would I have to endure this humiliation? What's the point of all of you playing games and putting on makeup? Fired Felix, you Lu Jiulong will take over? Or you Yang Lan, who here can show off and not be looked down upon? We are all human beings, but a graduate from a prestigious university can't compare to a college dropout. Why the hell are you looking at me? You don't have a job, right? Then go clean the 14th floor for me. The office was so quiet that only Yin Qingqing's panting could be heard. No one dared to respond to her. Her anger seemed to condense into substance in the air, overwhelming everyone. She gnashed her teeth and said, Are you all deaf? Can't you hear me? Do you want me to personally shove the mop into your hands? Or is it unfair for you to be asked to clean the house? If you don't want to do this, prepare your resignation letter and I will triple your salary. The Yiksha Queen was really angry, and Lu Jiulong was the first to run out of the office. He didn't dare to give up this job that supported his family, because his wife and children at home were still waiting for him to make money. Yin Qingqing looked at the documents on the table and said coldly, Manager Yang, Su Liang, Felix, write your names on the document. If Felix can't give me a satisfactory result tomorrow morning, you two should prepare to pack up and leave the company, and all your wages and bonuses will be deducted. Su Liang quickly stood up and said, Mr. Li, I'll go find Felix. He's definitely not the kind of person who runs away from the battlefield. Su Liang hurried out. Yang Lan stood there, lowered her head, tears dripping onto the ground, looking pitiful. Yin Qingqing looked at her, sighed, and said softly, Don't cry. You are the only ones in the company that I trust. It's not easy for you to take care of the child alone, but this Felix is really unruly. When he comes back, you have to discipline him well, just like you disciplined the little Yang family. Understand? Yang Lan choked up and nodded. I understand, Mr. Li. I won't cry anymore. Seeing that she still couldn't hold back her tears, Yin Qingqing felt a headache, picked up the documents, and quickly left the office. After Yin Qingqing left, Lu Jiulong returned to the office and saw Yang Lan in tears. He felt so distressed that he quickly took out a tissue and handed it to her, saying softly, "Lan, don't cry." Yang Lan shook her head and sobbed. "Don't comfort me. Go find Felix. I really don't want to be unemployed." Okay, I'll go find him right away." Lu Jiulong agreed and immediately turned around and walked out. He really liked Yang Lan, but it was a pity that Yang Lan only treated him as an ordinary colleague. At this time, the General Affairs Department of Glory Group was already in an uproar, and people from all departments came to watch the fun. The employees of the General Affairs Department wished that I would disappear as far away as possible. At this time, I was wearing a wrinkled shirt and strolling in the mall with Wendy in pajamas. We were the shabbiest people in the mall, but we couldn't hide our good looks. Wendy took me to various brand stores, including Vacheron Constantin and Rolex, but we didn't buy anything in the end. Even so, the sales staff at Glory Department Store were still enthusiastic and dedicated to serving. This pleasant morning passed quickly. When he went back to the company, I suddenly remembered that I hadn't gone to work yet. I slapped my forehead and cursed myself in my heart. I walked into the gate of honor with a nervous mood. The round-faced girl at the front desk saw me and her eyes widened. She immediately picked up the phone and called the general manager's secretary, but no one answered. I gave her a bright smile. The round-faced girl was stunned for a moment, then reacted, turned around, and ran quickly to the 14th floor to inform General Manager Yen that I was back. I took the elevator to the 11th floor. When the elevator door opened, the scene in front of me almost made me laugh out loud. My colleagues in the General Affairs Department were either mopping the floor or cleaning the windows and watering the flowers. They were all busy and happy. Deputy Director Liu is really hands-on. He knows that colleagues in the General Affairs Department are too idle, so he brings them out to stretch their muscles. I said loudly on purpose. Lu Jiulong glared at me angrily. "Bah, do you think I am willing? It's all because you, Han, have offended Mr. Li." As I was talking, someone suddenly spotted me and said, "Felix is back. Hurry up and catch him. Don't let him run away." In an instant, everyone surrounded me. Mops, brooms, and showers rushed towards me with murderous intent. I was stunned and immediately wanted to turn around and run away, but Lu Jiulong suddenly hugged me. Just when I thought I was going to get beaten, Yang Lan's voice came. "Felix, where are you?" Her voice was like a heavenly sound that saved me. I felt Lu Jiulong loosen his arm, turn around, and saw Yang Lan's face full of anxiety, her eyes slightly red. I grinned and said, "Sister Yang, please talk nicely. Don't pull my ears, it hurts." Yang Lan couldn't help crying after hearing this. "Do you know that you almost caused me and Su Liang to lose our jobs? If I lose my job, my family will collapse." I'm sorry. I apologized hastily, and when I took out my phone, I realized it was out of battery. My phone was broken last night, and it seemed like I hadn't charged it for half a month. Yang Lan pulled my ear and walked towards the General Affairs Department, scolding me as she walked. "Boss Lee has something urgent to tell you. How can you still be in the mood to go shopping for clothes? If you don't have clothes to wear, just tell me and I can buy them for you. You can't just disappear. Boss Lee didn't fire you because you were somewhat useful now. Otherwise, you would have been fired long ago." I nodded and replied, Yes, I know I was wrong, and I won't do it again next time." Colleagues in the General Affairs Department looked at us with different expressions. I knew they were resentful of me, but at the moment, I just wanted to get things done quickly and not make Yen Qingqing angry again. Yang Lan grabbed my ear and grimaced. I looked at Yang Lan blankly and said, "Why is he in such a hurry? Didn't I say that I would give him the result tomorrow morning?" "Sister Yang, don't feel aggrieved. This is my fault. I'm going to quarrel with him." I tried to stand up, but Yang Lan pushed me back into the chair. Yang Lan's eyes were red, and she gritted her teeth and cursed. "Why did you take this hot potato?" I couldn't help but lower my head and scratched it in embarrassment. Yang Lan was about to continue to say something, and the little Yang family hurried over. After seeing me, he breathed a sigh of relief, and without saying a word, he grabbed my arm and dragged me out the door. "Go see Mr. Li now, and you can still keep your body intact." I was dragged so hard that I staggered. Everyone in the general department breathed a sigh of relief, as if they were sending me to the execution ground. Xiao Yangjia muttered to the side, "Felix, were you taken care of by a rich woman yesterday? You actually wore a Gucci suit and went shopping in the mall?" Yen Qingqing rushed over in a rage, grabbed my collar with both hands, and almost lifted me up. "How dare you come to work? Were you happy to be served by the rich woman last night? Did you have a good time shopping?" Before she could finish, I suddenly lowered my head, and her head hit my nose hard. In an instant, tears flowed down my face. I covered my nose and stepped back a few steps, angrily saying, "Are you sick? You scolded me for being late, and now you're hitting me?" The young Yang family was stunned as they watched from the sidelines, muttering quietly, scolding Mr. Lee, "This is going to be a disaster." President Lee's face turned pale, and he gritted his teeth. "Felix, I'm going to fight you. Are you teasing me on purpose? You're just trying to get revenge on me for almost hitting you with my car last time. I'm going to satisfy you today and let you have a taste of regret." She yelled to Xiao Yang's family. "Go call the security guards and throw Felix out. I'm going to crush him to death." Xiao Yangjia was so scared that he turned and ran away. I quickly shouted, "Xiao Yangjia, come back." Then I turned to Mr. Lee and frowned and said, "How did I play tricks on you? You want a plan? I'll give you a plan. You want a solution? I'll give you a solution. This won't work. That won't work. What do you want? Just give me 2 days. Can I go out and do some research? Can inspiration just fall from the sky when I'm sitting in the office? Is Rong Yao really a fountain of inspiration? I'm really incompetent. How dare I take your job? The plan must be kept confidential. Once it's plagiarized, we have no chance. If you don't want to cooperate, I'll resign now. If you are willing to continue to cooperate, I promise to make you profitable. Bring out the plan," Yen Qingqing said aggressively. "Should I knock my head open for you to see?" I sneered. "Yang Jia, go get a wrench," she insisted. I turned around and ran without hesitation. This woman really dared to do this. Yen Qingqing sat in the boss chair, crossed her legs, and winked at Xiao Yangjia. Xiao Yangjia immediately closed the door and blocked me in front of me to prevent me from escaping. Yen Qingqing said coldly, "Go make 2 cups of coffee." "I don't drink coffee," I challenged. She didn't get angry and said calmly, "Then make some tea. Also, give each person in the General Affairs Department a bonus of 200 yuan and give it to Yanglan." I was a little surprised. Sister Yang didn't clean the house, so why should she be given a bonus? Yen Qingqing raised her lips slightly. "Prepare a contract for her to sell herself and have Felix sign it." Xiao Yangjia looked at her in surprise. It sounded like a joke, but who would take it seriously? He hurried to the finance office. Only Yen Qingqing and I were left in the huge office. She said no more, as if waiting for my explanation. After a while, tea was served, and there really was a sale contract. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. This gossipy little Yang family member really never stopped. Yen Qingqing pointed at the teapot on the coffee table and said in a cold tone, "Tell me about your plan. If I am not satisfied, this teapot will hit you on the head." I glanced at her and replied calmly, "Okay, just listen to half of it." I picked up the teapot and walked in front of her. She stood up suddenly. Her face turned pale, and she said in a trembling voice, "Felix, don't mess around." I ignored her nervousness, filled her cup with hot water, and said calmly, "Drink some hot water when your period comes. Don't get angry easily." As for the plan, I intend to continue working on the shopping mall project. This afternoon, I will ask Su Liang to do the final market research. After the results come out and you approve them, we will make the next decision. This plan must be kept confidential. Once it is imitated, our company will be doomed. You can notify the senior leaders in advance to hold a meeting, and I will explain my plan in detail at the meeting. Yen Qingqing picked up the water cup, her eyes showing a little more thought. "You are quite confident in yourself." I nodded. This matter does not require the board of directors to intervene, but a high-level meeting must be held. She looked at me suspiciously. "How do I know you're not an undercover agent sent by my competitor to embarrass me?" I smiled. "It's normal that you don't believe me. We are not familiar with each other. But I could take Sister Yang with me. She has my preliminary plan. If I really want to harm you, I won't drag Sister Yang, a single mother, to be buried with me, right? Even if I am laughed at, it is better than sitting and waiting to die. Even if the plan fails, you can only say that I can't judge people well, and I won't get the 400,000 life-saving money." I continued. 400,000 is an astronomical figure for me. I am willing to sign an agreement. If I fail, you can hang my photo on the display screen of Glory Plaza and make me socially dead. My words seemed to have touched her, and she fell into deep thought. After a while, she spoke. "A grown man like you, wearing a Gucci suit worth tens of thousands of dollars, you don't look like someone who is short of money." I smiled awkwardly. I didn't buy it. I rented it for 500 yuan a day. I need to meet with the people from the decoration company, and it would be more impressive if I were something more expensive. Yen Qingqing showed contempt in her eyes, but finally compromised. She took out a tie from the drawer and threw it to me. Tie it on. This is not cheap. I was going to give it to someone. I put on my tie and said with a wry smile, "Thank you, Mr. Lee." She waved her hand impatiently. "I don't want to waste my time talking to you. I can promise you, but you can't leave the company tonight, and Su Liang and Yang Lan have to stay too. If the plan passes the meeting tomorrow morning, you can go back, and I will pay you a 100,000 bonus. The rest will be given to you when the plan starts to make a profit." I nodded. "I see. What if you don't pass?" "Then you have to leave too," she said coldly. I was a little hesitant because I had a little idiot at home who was as good at cooking as setting himself on fire. But if I didn't agree, the plan might fail, and I might even lose my job. I took a deep breath and decided to take a gamble. "Okay, let's stay tonight." I agreed. She smiled and her tone softened a little. "Okay, then I'll arrange dinner for you, for dishes and one soup, plenty of drinks, and 2 packs of soft zhonghua." I couldn't help but laugh. "Then prepare another bed for Sister Yang. She's old, and it's not good for her to stay up late." Yin Qingqing nodded, stood up and walked to the window, with her back to me, and said with a hint of helplessness, "Felix, you'd better not let me down." I made a secret decision in my heart that I must succeed no matter what. Back at the General Affairs Department, I told Sister Yang and Su Liang about the overtime arrangements for tonight and asked them to be ready. As time passed, my eyelids began to droop and I yawned. Suddenly, an idea flashed through my mind. "Su Liang," I said softly, "I have a baby at home who needs to be fed. I have to go back and make dinner for her. I'll be back in 20 minutes. After listening to this, Su Liang shook his head helplessly. "Why don't you just order 2 takeout meals and send them to the company? I haven't eaten for a whole day and night." I glanced at his tired look and couldn't help but smile. "Okay, where do you live?" "Mountain and Water Dragon City," Su Liang replied. I nodded, and a strange sense of satisfaction welled up in my heart. I know that this kind of busyness makes people exhausted, but deep in my heart, I have an indescribable joy. Perhaps it is this kind of tension and challenge that makes me feel unprecedented vitality. The elevator was still under maintenance, and I climbed all the way to the 11th floor, my back soaked with sweat. I took off my suit, put on an apron, took out my cell phone, and called Wendy. "Hello, Felix." Wendy's voice came from the other end of the phone, with a hint of sleepiness and fatigue. Obviously, she had just woken up. "I was caught absent from work this morning," I explained while cutting vegetables. "I have to stay at the company tonight to work overtime, so I may not be able to go home at night. I'm making dinner for you now, and we'll put it under the sofa cushions. Remember to eat it and don't order takeout." "You're so annoying," Wendy said impatiently. "I'm not a child." I smiled and continued to instruct. "I put the medicine on the table. Remember to take 2 pills. Don't be lazy." I know. You're so long-winded." Her tone was filled with helplessness and ridicule. "If you're worried, just come to the company and keep an eye on me." I smiled helplessly. "Okay, I'm gonna go fight with Tony now. Don't sleep anymore. Be alert and drink more water." Okay, I got it." "It's so annoying," Wendy muttered at last and hung up the phone. I looked at the call records on the phone screen, and a warm feeling rose in my heart, and the corners of my mouth curled up unconsciously. This girl, she says she is annoyed, but she is actually happy in her heart. I talked to myself and was about to put down my phone when suddenly, I heard a noisy sound outside the door. Wendy went back to work. She heard that Tony, the acting president of her company, had just returned to China. He had been waiting for Wendy for the whole day, but had not seen her. He was very anxious. As soon as he finished work in the afternoon, he rushed over, but was stopped outside by the secretary. This made him even more furious. Tony pushed aside the secretary and opened the door of Wendy's office. When he saw Wendy lazily lying on the table, his eyes softened. After 3 years, this woman was more beautiful, more mature and attractive than he remembered. Her changes made him lose his mind for a moment, and the anger in his heart was instantly replaced by tenderness. "Wendy, I'm back," he said affectionately. Wendy slowly turned her head, glanced at him, then turned back to look out the window, and just said, "Oh," faintly. Tony was 1.85 meters tall, and in a tailor-made Italian suit, he looked like a prince from a painting. He had a charming smile on his face, and all the girls in the company were fascinated by him. But Wendy was indifferent. There was no light in her eyes, and she seemed extremely indifferent to the man in front of her. Tony noticed Wendy's indifference and felt a little sad. He walked forward, tried to reach out and touch her shoulder, and asked softly, "Wendy, are you feeling uncomfortable?" Just as his fingers touched Wendy, she sat up straight and took a step back. Her reaction stunned Tony. Her cold attitude was in stark contrast to her intimacy with me. I have a cold, and I don't want to infect you, Wendy said in a cold tone. Tony smiled, trying to ease the atmosphere. Don't be afraid. Didn't you always stick to me when you had a cold when you were a kid? Have you taken your medicine? I know a very good doctor. Let me take you to see him. He was still stuck in the memory of 3 years ago, remembering the Wendy who always depended on him. But Wendy is no longer the same person she was 3 years ago. She shook her head and rejected his kindness. No, I already had him for this morning. It's not a big deal. Intravenous drip? Tony frowned and asked with concern, You are most afraid of injections. Let me take a look. Wendy impatiently pulled her hand back in her sleeve and whispered, I don't want to do it. She once again refused to let Tony get close. Tony's smile gradually froze, and he noticed Wendy's indifference towards him. Despite this, he still tried to force a smile. Wendy, we haven't seen each other for a long time. I have a lot to say to you. I have booked a restaurant tonight. Let's go together. Wendy shook her head, her tone a little distant. I have a cold. Felix bought me medicine and made me dinner. I'm used to eating at home and don't want to go out. This sentence hit Tony's heart like a heavy hammer. Felix, aren't you divorced? Tony's voice was trembling, but he still tried to stay calm. Wendy's answer made his heart sink. Yes, we are divorced, but he still cooks for me every day, and we still live together. How about I cook for you when you recover from your cold? Tony suppressed the disappointment in his heart and tried to salvage something. No thanks, Wendy shook her head. I don't eat Western food anymore. I'm not used to it. Tony's patience was completely broken, and he almost slammed the door and walked out. He was furious and couldn't help but think, who on earth is this Felix, who could make Wendy change so much in just 3 years? After Tony left, Wendy felt like a huge rock was pressing on her chest. She slowly picked up her phone and dialed my number. Felix, I want to eat stewed beef with tomatoes, braised pork, and I want to eat everything. Her voice was low, as if she was crying. Okay. My voice came from the other end of the phone. Just one simple word made the tears in Wendy's eyes flow even more violently. Actually, I've been waiting for this call. I know Tony will go to see Wendy today, but I'm not sure what she will choose. If I can wait for this call, I will know that I am not redundant. If I can't wait, this house will be left to Wendy, and she can continue to live there if she likes it. Wendy mentioned a lot of dishes, but I know that she didn't say her favorite ones. Maybe she is still waiting for a moment that makes her feel really at ease. I decided to cook some of her favorite dishes tonight, not only to fill her stomach, but also to make her heart no longer empty. I understand that Wendy's tears were not because of anger, but because of her inner struggle. Tony's return forced her to face her past choices again, and she had an unavoidable history between him and me. Wendy was still sobbing on the other end of the phone. Felix, I'm not happy. I know, I responded softly. Whatever decision you make, I will support you. Wendy's voice choked up. I don't know why I'm crying. I just suddenly felt very scared. I took a deep breath and said firmly, You don't need to be afraid. You have me. We can face this together. Wendy nodded. Thank you, Felix. After hanging up the phone, I couldn't calm down for a long time. Wendy used to be so independent and strong, but in front of Tony, she turned back into the little girl who was afraid of loneliness. I know that no matter what her final choice is, I will be by her side, because true love never needs a reason. That night, I prepared several of Wendy's favorite dishes one by one, and she choked up and said, Thank you, Felix. I looked at her and reached out my hand to gently wipe away the tears on her face. Wendy, no matter what happens, I will always be by your side. She nodded and whispered, Thank you, Felix. Thank you for always being there. One night, I came home from work and saw Wendy sitting in the living room waiting for me. Her eyes were focused and complicated. When she saw me come in, she immediately stood up and walked in front of me. Felix, I want to talk to you, she said softly. I nodded and motioned for her to sit down and sat down next to her. What happened? Wendy bit her lower lip, as if she was hesitating whether to say it out loud. Finally, she took a deep breath and whispered, Tony has been pestering me lately. My heart tightened. Although I had expected this to happen, I couldn't help but feel angry when I heard her say it. What did he do to you? I asked coldly. Wendy shook her head with a hint of helplessness in her eyes. He didn't do anything to me. He just kept asking me out for dinner and gave me gifts. I rejected them all, but he still wouldn't give up. I was silent for a while, trying my best to suppress the anger in my heart, and gently held her hand. Wendy, if you feel uncomfortable, tell me and I will help you. She looked at me with a hint of gratitude in her eyes. I know you will help me, but I don't want you to conflict with him. I sighed and held her face gently. I won't let him hurt you, no matter what method he uses. Wendy's eyes wavered a little. She leaned on my shoulder and whispered, Felix, sometimes I wish we had never divorced. Then everything wouldn't be so complicated. I stroked her hair gently and said softly, the past cannot be changed, but the future is in our hands. Wendy, I don't care what others think. I just want you to be happy. Wendy nodded slightly, closed her eyes, and leaned on my shoulder. Felix, Wendy said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was gentle but firm. I want to talk to you about what's going on between us. I turned my head and looked into her eyes, which showed a little uneasiness and deep expectation. I nodded. I want to tell you something from my heart, too. Wendy took a deep breath, as if to encourage herself, and then she slowly said, in the past few months, I have been wondering why I was hesitant between you and Tony. In the past relationship, I thought I was just used to his presence, but in fact, it was more because I was not confident in myself. I looked at her, without interrupting, just listening quietly. Wendy continued, Tony and I have known each other for too long, so long that I think it is a habit, an excuse for me to avoid growing up. Maybe I really liked him in the past, but now I can be sure of my feelings. I like you, Felix, not Tony. I don't know when I started to like you. I've gotten used to you not being able to live without you. I know I used to bully you a lot in the past, but I will change in the future. Her eyes were sparkling with tears, and I knew every word she said came from the heart. Wendy, I said softly, holding her hand tightly, I have struggled a lot, and I like you too. You know I am just a child from an ordinary family, or even a poor boy. I never thought about getting married until I met you. I have always worried whether I am good enough and whether I can bring you true happiness. After our marriage came to an end, I blamed myself and doubted myself, but I never stopped loving you. Her tears finally fell, but a relieved smile appeared on her face. She leaned her head on my shoulder and sobbed softly. Felix, I have always loved you too. I thought you didn't care anymore, and you gave up. I stroked her hair gently, feeling a warm feeling in my heart. I never gave up on you, Wendy. It's just that I don't know how to win you back. Wendy raised her head and looked at me, tears blurring her vision. She smiled slightly. We both thought the other had given up, but in fact we have always been in each other's hearts. Felix, I really don't want to miss you again. I took a deep breath and looked her in the eyes seriously. Wendy, let's start over, okay? This time, we will be honest with each other, no longer hide our feelings, and no longer let misunderstandings and inferiority destroy our relationship. Wendy nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She choked and said, Okay, Felix, I'm willing to start over. I will let go of the past and face the future with you. I gently held her in my arms and felt her body trembling slightly. At that moment, I knew that we both got the true answer in each other's embrace. However, Tony was clearly not going to give up easily. A few days later, Wendy and I returned home from work and found a large bouquet of roses at the door of the apartment, with an exquisite gift box next to it. Wendy's face suddenly darkened. She picked up the small card which read, Wendy, this is a gift I carefully selected for you. I hope you like it. Tony. I looked at her hand holding the card tightly and asked softly, What do you want to do with it? Wendy didn't hesitate. She turned around and threw the flowers and gift box directly into the trash can. Her movements were quick and decisive, seemingly without any emotion. I walked up to her and gently held her shoulders. You don't need to worry about this kind of person. The things he gave you are not worth your nostalgia. Wendy glanced at me and nodded. I know. His little tricks only make me more disgusted. She turned back to the house, and although she tried to keep calm on her face, I could sense her inner struggle. Tony's entanglement not only made her feel troubled, but also made her face those unresolved emotions in the past again. That night, Wendy went to bed early. There was a trace of tiredness on her face, and I could feel her exhaustion. Looking at her sleeping face, I made up my mind that no matter what, I would protect her. The next day, I went to the company early in the morning. When I got downstairs, I saw Tony standing at the door, as if waiting for someone. Felix. Tony saw me, and a hint of hostility flashed in his eyes, but he quickly concealed it and replaced it with a smile. Can we chat? I gave him a cold look, knowing that he wanted to talk to me about Wendy. Although I didn't want to waste time with him, I also understood that this matter would have to be resolved sooner or later. Okay, I nodded. We walked to a coffee shop nearby, and Tony sat opposite us, seeming a bit arrogant. Felix, he began, I know you and Wendy were once very close, but you're divorced now, and she's free. I sneered. Yes, we are divorced, but that doesn't mean you can harass her at will. Tony shrugged. I'm not harassing her. I'm just pursuing her. Wendy is a free person, and she has the right to choose who she wants to be with. I suppressed my anger and said calmly, Wendy's choice has nothing to do with you. She doesn't want to be with you, and you better understand that. Tony smiled. Does she really not want to be with me? Or, do you not want her to be with me? I stared at him and said calmly, no matter what you think, Wendy's decision is the most important. If she really wants to come back to you, I will never stop her. But so far, she has clearly rejected you. Tony's face changed slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. He nodded slowly. Okay, I understand. But I won't give up easily, Felix, neither will I. I stood up and looked at him coldly. It depends on what you do. When I left the cafe, I felt a little heavy in my heart. I knew Tony would not give up. But no matter what he did, I would not let him hurt Wendy. A few days later, some bad rumors suddenly spread in the circle. Some people said that Wendy and I were divorced but still had such an ambiguous relationship, and that a strong woman like Wendy was only worthy of a handsome man like Tony. These rumors were spreading like wildfire. She tried to explain, but these rumors seemed to be getting more and more exaggerated. Some people even said that she and I planned the failure of a big project together. That afternoon, I saw Wendy sitting alone in the office, with her head down, her eyes full of helplessness and anger. I walked over and asked softly, Are you okay? She raised her head, tears glistening in her eyes. How can these people talk nonsense like this? They don't know me at all. What right do they have to judge me like this? I looked at her distressfully. Wendy, don't pay attention to those silly rumors. We know the truth, and nothing else matters. She smiled bitterly. But these words affect my work. I can't just turn a blind eye to them. I nodded to show my understanding. I'll find a way to solve it, don't worry. Tony is behind all this. He wants to use these rumors to force Wendy to leave the company so that he can have more opportunities to get close to her. So I decided to look for Tony. When I arrived at his office, I found him sitting leisurely at the table, seemingly waiting for me. Felix, he saw me come in with a meaningful smile on his face. Are you here to talk about rumors? I looked at him coldly. Tony, what do you want to do? How will this benefit Wendy? Tony smiled and leaned back in his chair. I just want her to understand that only I can give her the life she wants. She doesn't belong here, and she doesn't belong to you either. I felt a burning sensation in my chest and suppressed my anger. You will only make her hate you more. You know she doesn't like being pushed. Tony's expression turned gloomy. She will understand. I will let her see that I am the best person for her. Do you think you like Wendy? Or do you like the shares she holds? If you like her as a person, where have you been these years? How many times have you come back to see her? Do you really care about her? Where were you when she was sick? Where were you when she needed you? I scolded angrily. I shook my head and turned away. Since he was not going to stop, I could only protect Wendy with my actions. That night, I thought about it for a long time at home. Suddenly, an idea came to my mind. Since Tony can spread rumors, I can also fight back with the truth. The next morning, I went to the company's HR department and asked to see the company's internal emails and communication records. I knew that Tony couldn't have spread these rumors himself. He must have accomplices or lackeys. After several hours of searching, I finally found a suspicious email record. The sender was an employee in the company's marketing department, and the recipient was Tony's private email address. The content of the email involved Wendy's private information, as well as some unfounded speculations and rumors. After getting the evidence, I immediately went to the company's HR director and handed it to him. After reading it, the HR director's face turned ugly. Felix, these evidences are enough to get that employee fired. But if this matter involves Tony, we need more clear evidence. I nodded, knowing that this was just the first step. Next, I would have found Wendy and told her what happened. After hearing what happened, Wendy's eyes flashed with surprise and anger. So he was behind this. I comforted her. Don't worry, we have evidence, and we can ask the company to resolve the issue. Wendy nodded. Felix, thank you. You have been helping me all this time. I held her hand and said gently, This is what I should do. No matter what happens, I will be by your side. Wendy's eyes welled up with tears, and she held my hand tightly. Felix, I suddenly realized that you were the one who has always been by my side. My heart warmed up, and I hugged her gently. Wendy, I have never left you. In the following days, the whole company was discussing the news that the marketing employee had been fired. Tony also noticed my actions. He began to become a little nervous, and every time he saw me and Wendy together, his face would become gloomy. One evening, I was working overtime in the office when I suddenly received a call from Wendy. Her voice sounded anxious. Felix, Tony came to see me. He said he wanted to talk to me alone. My heart tightened, and I immediately asked, "Where are you?" "I'll come find you." "On the terrace on the top floor of the company." Wendy's voice trembled a little. I quickly ran to the top floor, opened the door to the terrace, and saw Tony standing in front of Wendy, looking a little excited. "Wendy, listen to me," Tony shouted. "You can't just give up on our relationship like this. We've known each other for so many years. You can't do this to me." Wendy took a step back, her face full of rejection. "Tony, it's over between us. Please don't push me anymore." I walked up, stood next to Wendy, and said to Tony coldly, "Tony, that's enough. Wendy has made it clear that she doesn't want to have anything to do with you. You'd better leave her." Tony's eyes were filled with anger and jealousy. He gritted his teeth and said, "Felix, do you think you can beat me? You're just a divorced loser. Wendy deserves better, not someone like you." I looked at him calmly. "I don't need to beat you. Wendy's choice is clear. She needs someone who truly cares about her, not a selfish person who only forces her." Tony's face instantly turned ferocious, and he swung his fist at me. I quickly dodged his attack, then punched him in the face with my backhand. I stared at him coldly. "If you continue to pester Wendy, I will never show mercy." Wendy held my arm tightly, her hands trembling slightly. I could sense her fear and uneasiness, so I gently held her shoulders and whispered to her comfortingly, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Tony covered his face and turned away from the terrace angrily. I know this storm is not over yet, but at least Wendy understands what she really needs. Tony left. Wendy was still a little upset. She leaned into my arms and whispered, "Felix, I'm sorry. I didn't expect things to turn out like this." I stroked her hair gently. "It's not your fault, Wendy. You just met someone who wouldn't let go." Wendy's eyes flashed with determination. She looked up at me and said firmly, "Felix, I've made up my mind." I was stunned and asked in a low voice, "What decision?" Wendy took a deep breath and said, "I want him to give up completely. I decided to move back. I want to remarry you and live with you." I looked at her in surprise, but soon smiled with relief. "Are you sure?" Wendy nodded, her eyes firm. "Yes, I'm sure." I felt mixed emotions and excitement when I heard this. The misunderstandings and separations between us over the past few years have finally come to an end. Wendy's decision made me feel her sincerity and courage. "Okay, let's move back." I hugged her gently, feeling her warmth and softness. That night, we packed up some of Wendy's things. She sat in the car, looking out the window at the company building gradually moving away, and sighed softly. "Felix, what do you think the future will be like?" I smiled and held her hand. "No matter what the future holds, we will face it together." One weekend afternoon, Wendy and I went to our favorite park. The autumn sunshine was soft and shining on Wendy's hair, as if it was coated with a layer of golden light. "You know what? I like it here very much," Wendy said softly, her eyes full of tenderness. I nodded. "I know. This is where we had our first date." Wendy smiled, a flash of memory in her eyes. "Yeah, you were so clumsy that you stepped on my skirt." I laughed. "Yeah, I was so nervous at that time." Wendy looked up at me with love in her eyes. "Felix, I'm so glad we can start over." I held her hand and said seriously, "Wendy, I swear I will never let you down this time." She nodded slightly and leaned on my shoulder. "I believe you." At that moment, I felt an unprecedented peace in my heart. Wendy was beside me, and her smile and eyes made me feel that everything was so beautiful. A few months later, our lives became more stable and sweet. Wendy decided to learn some new skills to improve her value in the company, and I returned to work and worked hard for our common future. Tony disappeared from the company. I heard that he was transferred to a branch abroad for development. No one mentioned him anymore. He seemed to have been forgotten. Wendy is pregnant. When Wendy told me she was pregnant, I felt mixed emotions and excitement. The arrival of this little life has filled us with more expectations and plans for the future. Wendy suggested that we bring both sets of parents to live together. Although I had some concerns, I felt that Wendy's idea was very thoughtful. So we started looking for a house that was big enough to accommodate our new family and provide comfortable living space for both parents. After a few weeks, we finally found a warm and large house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room, and a small garden. which was just right for our family to live together. On the day of moving, my parents were also very happy to help with the packing. Wendy's parents came from a nearby city, and my parents had already prepared to move in. Seeing the two families happily packing, unpacking, and decorating their new home, the little worries in my heart were gradually soothed. After the new life began, the atmosphere at home became very Wendy. In the morning, Wendy's mother would always get up early to make breakfast. She was very skilled in cooking and always surprised us with different dishes. My mother liked to take care of the small garden. She always came back with a pot of newly planted flowers and shared her gardening experience with us. The two fathers often went for walks in the nearby park together and occasionally went fishing. Not only did they become good friends, they sometimes even discussed preparing a sumptuous dinner for us. Wendy and I, life seems to have found a new rhythm in this tranquility and warmth. Every day when I come home and see the smiling faces of my parents and Wendy's slightly bulging belly, I feel an unprecedented sense of peace and happiness. We often sit together and talk about the baby's future name or discuss how to decorate the baby's room. The days flow by warmly and peacefully. I cherish the present days and look forward to the arrival of a new life in my family.